Mr. Sapien, welcome.
Thank you.
Dude, it's been a long time coming.
Yeah,
Speaking of a long time coming, Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson.
brother.
What are your thoughts?
Okay.
Give us
Okay.
the wisdom.
So here's okay. This is total armchair quarterback, but here's the thing. Jake Paul, I kind of hate because I'm a little jealous. I don't
Hmm.
think I could go from YouTuber to like fucking what influencer to like actually decent boxer.
Hmm.
Like, dude's got some hands. But here's the problem. It's Mike Tyson. It's Mike. It's Iron Mike, dude. I don't care. Like I have to root for Mike Tyson. I have to. I want
Yeah.
him to win. I yes, he is significantly older. I think it was like the last time they had to cancel it because he like had some health issues or something in training camp. Um, I don't care about any of that. It's Mike Tyson. I got to root for Mike Tyson, and I frankly think he's still got it to where when he's telling oh, I got the devil on my thigh, and I'm gonna bring him in the ring with me. That fucking scares me, bro. Like, how are you gonna get in the ring with them? So I'm really hoping for Mike to just fucking do the one punch knockout. I hope for that. I'm gonna be pretty devastated if I watch a 60-year-old man get knocked unconscious in a boxing
By a
ring.
28-year-old.
And it's
Yeah.
sanctioned now. It's
Mm.
gonna go on his professional record.
Wow. No.
Oh,
Yeah.
dang.
Mike is 59 and Jake is 28. Is that right?
Something like that. I don't think
Okay.
those numbers are too far off, if
Okay.
at all.
What's your take on someone was on Rogan a couple months ago saying that it might have even been Joe saying that aging, if you're at a certain level of professional assistance, with the coaching you have, with the supplements you can take, with the type of exercises we're familiar with now, where exercise science is, a 58-year-old now doesn't have to be like a 58-year-old in, say, 1980. Do you think there's any credence to that from training regimens, stretching regimens, supplements, gear?
yeah, yeah, for sure. It's funny. I was really ready to jump on and be like, oh yeah, 58-year-old today is like so much healthier. But then you kind of threw in the gear there, and that like stuck in me a little bit because I think about, we so often we talk about these young guys getting on gear, and
Mhm.
you're like, dude, you're gonna die at 40.
Mhm.
Like you're lucky to make it to 60. Like,
Yeah.
and then we kind of see, I'm gonna say like almost an opposite effect when you have somebody who I'm sure Mike Tyson wasn't natural during pro boxing. I can't imagine he was.
Yeah.
But I mean, if he was, like, yeah, that would put you back in the game, right? Like, get your test levels up. Oh yeah, sorry.
You're good.
Get your no.
No, you're right there's perfect.
Yeah, get your test levels up, all that kind of stuff. But I do think, yeah, probably the line's a little more blurred than it used to be. I
Okay.
think. I think maybe 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we were looking and we'd be like, a 58-year-old man doesn't stand a chance. And
I mean, this was the plot of what, like Rocky 5 or something like that. Like Rocky comes back as like a 59-year-old. Like this is literally
yeah,
a movie plot
yeah,
that we're about to see played out on what, Saturday night, right?
Friday
Friday.
night. Yeah,
Yeah, like this was something that a Hollywood writer made up
yeah,
in order to keep the Rocky franchise going for one more round. And now we're literally doing it.
yeah.
That seems wild to me. I'm just curious if you think Tyson actually has a decent
I
shot.
think he does, and I think that's the crazy part. Is like we're sitting here debating it, like
Mhm.
like it's a conversation. Whereas I think 20 years ago, we would be like a 26-year-old, a 28-year-old is gonna absolutely blast this geriatric,
Mm.
like.
Mhm.
But now we're sitting here going like, yeah, yeah, there's a chance. There's a chance Iron Mike fucking beats the shit out of this kid,
I mean,
right? Like,
The thing is old man strength too.
yeah, that's what I'm saying. And I truly think like you look at Mike Tyson now and you're like, he still looks bad. He still looks like a bad man. Like, and does that leave you, right? Like, I'm not a striker. I don't know, right? I don't know how it feels to strike or any of that.
Mm.
I imagine it's like riding a bike. Like at a certain point, you just know how to punch people in the face. Like that's
The only thing he knows.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And I just think the Mike Tyson story is so cool. Um, in like a weird way, I've always said I think I was born angry. Like I like some of my earliest memories as a kid was just like I was mad. I wanted like, little like, elementary school bully. Like I was always trying to beat up on my brother. Like I just fucking came out that womb not excited to be here.
Mhm.
And I remember as a kid, like watching Mike Tyson, him talking about, obviously Mike Tyson was in a much rougher spot in life than I was at pretty much all of his life.
Mhm.
But there was something kind of comforting about having another person be like, yeah, I just crave violence. And like, that's okay. And I found a way to do that in this profession in which I get to punch people in the face and everybody cheers.
Mhm.
And I think there was something pretty cathartic about that as a kid. Like I wanted to be a boxer. That's how I got into wrestling. Is
Oh.
I wanted to be a boxer and my mom wouldn't let me box. She'd always say you're too cute to box, which I fucking hated. Right? Like no like 10-year-old wants to hear
She
you
had
too
a
cute to
modeling
box.
career in mind
Yeah,
for you.
when you're trying to be a fucking man, you want to like go out there and fight, and you're like, oh, you're too cute to box, but yeah, I think there was something really comforting about like Mike Tyson being just this kind of like angry dude, and I think seeing him in his older age, especially after his first retirement, I guess,
Sure.
being like, oh no, I found peace. Like I've relaxed. I've learned how to let that go. I've learned how to like, that doesn't have to be a part of me for me to be happy and all that stuff. And I think in a lot of ways, still as like, being young and figuring some of those parts out, I was telling John before this, I had this whole debacle with a couch the other week and I wanted to be angry about it and everything kept going right and I couldn't be. And I was like angry that I couldn't be angry about how well the situation went, how much I love this new couch. Right. And I think that even now, there's still something very resonant with watching this guy who's this, says he's like this angry person. He likes to fight. He craves this violence. Right. And someone who feels like I'm also in that boat. Obviously to a less degree and less professional degree. And then have him in his old age be like, no, I'm that's beyond me. Like I'm more than that. Like I can be this more full person and relax and all those things like that. I still find that like inspiring. So when I say like I want Mike Tyson to win, it's because like I'm looking at Mike like fuck is that I want that to be me. Like when I'm 48, I still want to have it.
Yeah.
You know?
You want to be in a place where you can be peaceful and integrated, but have a place where you can go to access that rage.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at, I don't know, 14 or 15, you felt like the rage had both hands on the wheel.
Yeah.
You want to make the rage the co-pilot
Sure.
and sometimes say, all right, you take the wheel.
Yeah.
It's time for rage.
Yeah, in a way, I kind of said this to several therapists over the years. Like anger feels like home, like defaulting to like angry feels like good. Like it feels like I'm in control of my emotions when I'm angry, right? And I think for some people, I think we all have some degree of that. I think some people feel that in sadness, some people feel that in like apathy, things like that. But that's always been anger for me. Like that default's anger. And I think that there's a certain level, like especially with jujitsu, as I find that I don't have to, I fight better when I'm calm, when I'm happy, when I'm having a good time. Right. There is part of me that's like a little like, oh shit, but I don't feel at home. You know what I mean? Like I don't
Interesting.
that like, doesn't feel wrong to me, even though I know it's not necessarily appropriate or like the best thing. And that's making it come off like I'm like out here fucking eyeing people up in the parking lot, but I promise that's not the case. But it is one of those things
That's
where
such an interesting thought that maybe every person has the emotion that feels like home to them. Why are you sad all the time? I don't know. Maybe I don't really necessarily want to be, but it feels like an old sweater that I've owned
yeah,
forever.
yeah, it just feels like the right skin to wear.
Yeah.
I think of Inside Out. Have you guys ever seen that movie? Like
Yeah.
every character in that, if you notice, like the pilot is a different emotion. So like the main character's is joy, but the dad's is anger,
Yeah.
and
The mom's is sadness
and stuff. And I feel like that's kind of
that hit me hard when I saw that movie.
it's like that's real. Like I feel like that dad that like, yeah, anger's the fucking pilot. Like he's the one being like, hey, brother, like, like he's the one he's when something happens, anger's like, can we be pissed off? Like, you know what I mean? And all the other like Joyce like, hold on, bro. Get out of here, like
they're right there raising their hand. Me? Can I be me? Yeah.
exactly. So that's how I've always felt. And going back to the Mike Tyson thing, like that's why I want him to win. It's like because a win for him feels like a win for me. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It makes me feel like I'm looking at myself at 48 being like, I can still got it.
Yeah.
Still got it.
Yeah. Man, I don't know what's gonna happen. I think I'll watch it. What's that? It's Friday. Yeah, I think I'll probably go and watch it.
Yeah.
Um,
It's on Netflix too. Crazy. Like
Yeah.
crazy that Netflix is doing that.
Josh is hosting a.
Yeah, Josh just texted me. So
Working. Fucking
are you working?
Yeah, dude.
Man, talk about anger. Yeah.
I know, dog.
I actually want to ask you about that.
Okay.
We'll probably end up back at fight sports, but you've been doing emergency medical services for a while now. You and I have had a lot of really interesting conversations about it. And I'm just curious how emergency medical services is so siloed away, it seems to me, from the rest of our health system,
Oh yeah.
right? We don't EMS, they get grouped in with firefighters and police, like people who have to
Hmm.
respond to people's worst day,
Yeah.
right? I mean, it seems to me that emergency medicine is part of the overall medical system, but it's again, from an observer's point of view, it seems that we have this weird system in which it's sort of its separate thing. Is that a
Yeah.
correct impression?
Dude, like that was fucking perfect. Like that was spot on. I talk about this all the time because you know, I I think about this a lot. And obviously all of us in the profession, all the other medics, EMTs, we're always talking about like what's kind of the future of EMS? Like where are we going with this? And uh yeah, we are part of healthcare, but we get seen as first responders, which we are first responders, right? We show up with everybody.
Mhm.
But it's a weird dichotomy, right? You look at, we started this union to fight for better pay because, as a medic, I was getting paid $15 an hour. I was making the same as the guys at McDonald's, right? Which is pretty fucking crazy, right? Um, but also at the same time, you're this medical guy, but you're also EMT. You can go take a 4-week class up at the Knowles campus and go ride on an ambulance. So like the education to importance ratio is kind of really askew. Nurses are getting BSNs, doctors are going to 6 years of school and then residency, engineers are getting master's degrees before they're getting hired. Like these jobs that are paying really high that we see as this like huge value to society, especially in healthcare, come with all this education. EMS just doesn't. I got my EMT in 1 semester and I got my paramedic in 9 months, which
Mhm.
the 9 months was an accelerated program. Sure, most of them were 2 years, but still 2 years to have a wider scope of practice than a nurse does in most states. Like that's nuts. I've
Can you
done
just help us? Scope of practice.
yeah. So yeah, sorry, getting ahead of myself. Scope of practice is basically, with the exception of physicians, right? An MD, a doctor, doctors have their own medical license,
Okay.
right? So that means within the realm of studied medicine, within the realm of peer review studies and evidence-based medicine, they can kind of do what they want. And I'm using a heavy quotation on what they want. You go down to nurses. Nurses operate under kind of a doctor's license. So there's a national board that says like, here's what you can do. You can do A through Z, these certain things. You can't do these things. You can do these things with permission from your doctor. And they kind of set this huge wide scope.
Okay.
Each state then has their own scope that's usually a little narrower than that. And then each county or each hospital, I mean, it can get really finite, has an even narrower scope than that. And that's basically what you're allowed to do as a clinician.
Okay.
As paramedics, it varies greatly from state to state, county to county, all that stuff. But for the most part, we can do some pretty crazy shit. California was a little more restricted. I think the idea is you're 5 minutes away from a hospital. So start an IV, get them to a doctor. Out here, we might have 2-hour, 3-hour transports. So they go, brother, we need you to do some real medicine out there. Like you got to cowboy up a little bit. And, if you got to end up, putting a needle in this dude's chest or doing like a needle crike, where if you don't know, is like you see it in the movies all the time where like they jab the pen through the throat. Like I can do the actual version of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I have before. And like that's pretty crazy. Nurses can't do that. Right. And that's something that's entrusted me to do without any oversight in the back of an ambulance with me and my partner who may have went to 4 weeks of school. That's fucking crazy.
In a moving vehicle. In a moving vehicle.
Yeah. And here's the thing. It's not like I've been working in EMS for 5 years. I've been a medic for close to 3 of them.
Right.
And by medic, we mean paramedic. There's a real chance, and I'm sure somebody in the country has done this, where you've went to a 9-month school, you've gotten off your FTO time, which is when you operate under another paramedic. So they watch you and make sure before they release you on your own, and gotten paired up with an EMT who took a 4-week class and had to do that crike that day. Right.
Right.
Like my
In a country this big, it's happened.
It's happened. Right. So like, that's mind boggling that like this invasive life-saving procedure is done by people with an accumulative less than a year of school.
Whoa.
Right? So then you kind of get the low pay. But then on the other hand, it does beg the question of, are we overthinking it a little bit? Like if 9 months of an education can get you cracking people
Yeah.
and kind of having a gist, and that's overselling my ability a little bit. You know, we always heard it joked about.
You wouldn't think of that procedure as like, oh, just another day in the ambulance, right? Like,
I know I've done one, and
you'd break a sweat if you had to.
Oh, so I did one my close to first week as a paramedic.
Okay.
I was on FTO time, thankfully, and it was a pretty bonkers story, but it was one of those things where like I've never shaken that bad in my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's cardiac arrest. So the person's already deceased, which, you know, that does help a little bit because at least you can't make it worse. But yeah, it was like so nerve-wracking and I was so new and like, yeah, dude, like terrifying. I hope to never do it again. I will if I have to. And now I feel much more prepared for it. But yeah, it is kind of crazy to think, dude, 9 months ago, I didn't know how to do this.
Mhm.
Like I haven't practiced this a lot. Like I'm fucking going for it. Like this is nuts. And I think the main difference, it's just a weird thing. I think back to your kind of original topic of there's this discrepancy between hospital-based healthcare and EMS, emergency medical services. My paramedic teacher, she was fantastic out in North Carolina. She said, one day we will be treated the same as nurses and doctors, but that is entirely up to our culture. Right now, you go to any EMS station, you're going to see a dude with a lit cigarette in his mouth, with a dip in, like spitting into a trash can, taking a huff, slamming 3 energy drinks, and going out to a call, right? Like, we like being lumped in with fire and police. We like being kind of cowboys and going out there. Yeah, we ride fast, we blow red lights, all that stuff. You don't see 2 dudes hop out of an ambulance go, those are white collar professionals, right?
Yeah.
And that's why society doesn't see us that way. Are you thankful for us? Yes. Same way you're thankful for firefighters and police officers when you need one. But here's
the way you're thankful for a plumber when your basement's flooding.
Exactly, right? You're like, you do a job, but it's down and dirty. You're getting your hands in there. You're out with the people. You know, we are a blue collar profession, so we get treated that way.
Okay.
Right. But we kind of do integrate into the healthcare system. We are an important part of it.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is we're the newest part of the healthcare system. So paramedicine has only been around since the Korean War. And back when ambulances first started, you drove a hearse and you decided it was only one person. You'd load them into the back of this hearse and you decide whether or not they were healthy enough to drive to the hospital or to the morgue.
Whoa.
Yeah. And that was since the Korean War. So how many years is that? That's
So call it 70.
70 years, right? That's nothing. That's nothing. We have no clue how well or how poorly this fits into that chain, that healthcare chain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that over time, we're going to find there's a bigger and bigger role in EMS. And you already see other countries requiring degrees for it and all that stuff. And I think that that's the way it's going to go in America as well. I think over time, we're going to see, hey, why don't we have what is emergency physicians on ambulances? So that way, when I get out there, you know, I've heard somewhere that out in like Washington or something, they have advanced practice paramedics who are doing like minor surgeries in ambulances. But they also do 4 more years of school and like do follow some sort of residency and all that kind of stuff. And I think that is the way that paramedicine will go. I think that's the way EMS will go. And then you're not going to be like, oh, it's firefighters, law enforcement, and medics. You're going to be like, no, it's doctors, nurses, and medics, right? You're going to lump them into that white collar field. They hop out of the ambulance. You're going to be like, these are professionals that have a job to do. And if they're a little cold and if they're a little callous, it's because they are super smart and know what they're doing. Right now they walk out and you're like, who is this teenager? You know, like, I think the medicine will change in that way, but yeah, there is a huge disparity. And I truly think it is up to us as the workers to kind of ask for more of that responsibility and say, I'm going to go to school for medicine. I'm going to become a nurse. I'm going to come back to the ambulance. I'm going to work critical care. I'm going to do all these things to kind of upsert and show as a EMS culture that we want to be seen as white collar and we want to move away from blue collar. But I think we're a decade, if not more, out from that. Wow. I think we're not quite ready to let go of that cowboy nature.
It attracts some of the people who want to sort of live that lifestyle anyway. So it's a
bunch of weirdos in EMS. For fucking sure. A lot of type A personalities. A lot of type A. You'd be surprised actually for like, you think like, oh, it's all chaotic. No, dude, there's a lot of like likes to put things in boxes, personalities. I actually don't get along very well with other medics and EMTs sometimes because I'm very laissez-faire, like, you know, take it as it comes. Okay, we can handle it, like no big deal.
Mhm.
I'm not that things in boxes thinking of every contingency kind of person.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, you're gonna find a lot of type A, a lot of weirdos. But that's also because it's a low barrier to entry, right? Like 4 weeks of school.
Well, so that's kind of my question is I think you've described difficulties, at least here in Wyoming, with staffing these positions. I don't know if it's because we're a rural state and a rural county, but maybe EMS everywhere has trouble keeping
They
staff
do.
up, but it has a low barrier to entry. I mean, would we actually have an easier time staffing our EMS positions if we required more?
That's a fucking brilliant question. That is for somebody so much smarter than I am. I do think that it's going to be one of those things where it's like, what comes first, chicken or the egg? Where it's like, are you going to pay us more first, or are you going to require us to do right? Because if you tell us we all need 4-year degrees, but then you're going to pay me $20 an hour, hold on, brother, that's not going to happen, right? But if you pay me 30 an hour, how are you going to get a taxpayer to pay that for no extra benefit to them, right? No extra education, right? If I was like, guys, your taxes are going up by like 20 cents on the dollar, and I'm going to do the same ass job. Like, you're not going to get any higher quality care for the next like decade.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, that's a tough sell. And that's definitely a tough sell considering a lot of EMS is privatized, stuff like that. Like there are for-profit companies that are, handling these EMS contracts and stuff like that. Like, that's an even harder sell from a business standpoint to say, I'm going to make this 10-year investment on a career that the culture isn't that people get all these degrees, right? Like, if one of the multi-billion-dollar EMS agencies wants to pioneer that, power to them. That would be probably the greatest humanitarian mission of this century. But I don't see that happening. I see it being
Multi-billion EMS companies.
for sure. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but I don't think by too much. There are these huge conglomerates that are just making money hand over fist. Because yeah, they buy up these contracts and they pay a little to the county, and there's a lot of politics on that. I'm not like the biggest savant at,
Okay.
but there are some very successful companies like AMR. You can look them up. They're this American Medical Response. It's the company I work for in Stockton. They're fucking ginormous. They're all over the country. You go anywhere in the country, drive around for a little bit, you're going to see an AMR rig.
An AMR.
Yeah, they have them up in Bozeman, Colorado, like everywhere.
Okay. Yeah, I've definitely seen them for
Mhm.
sure. So let's say that you woke up one morning and said, I like taking care of people, but I want to make more money for myself in emergency medicine. You would go start your own ambulance company? I mean, is that the route to it?
Oh, dude, I don't
You
think so.
like the natural steps of pay grade as an employee typically isn't going to get you there. Is that true?
So not exactly. There is a huge turnover from people who are paramedics that turn nurses. Paramedic to nurse is like a fucking pipeline.
Okay.
Right. Paramedic to flight medic or flight nurse. Like, the flight medics do get paid a decent amount more, different shift schedule. It's not for everybody. But paramedic to nurse is like a super easy trajectory that you see like a lot of medics go to. I think like half, like generously half of all medics go into nursing, right? A little bit easier on your body, a little bit better schedule. There is less responsibility. I don't make decisions, right? When I'm in the back, I have a set of protocols and I have a scope, and I need
to in the back, meaning the back of the ambulance.
Sorry, yeah, in the back,
in the
back of the ambulance. I get this patient, and it can be one of 6 things, but I got to do some sort of treatment. I'm fixing, their blood pressure is a little low, their heart rate's a little high. Okay, they had an infection. I'm gonna go sepsis, but I'm making that decision. Nobody's telling me it's sepsis. Do these things. I'm sitting there and I'm assessing this patient, going, okay, based on my assessment, I believe this to be sepsis. Okay. Yeah, they're running a fever. Okay. They meet my sepsis criteria. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to run a bag. I'm going to do all this. You get some people who went straight from nursing and try to go into flight nursing, which is a little bit more like EMS in the way that nurses, when they're in a hospital, are typically given orders by a doctor and they fulfill those orders and stuff like that. Whereas in the airplane or the helicopter, they will be the highest authority in that helicopter. Right. So they make the decision. They're the ones telling the medic there, like, hey, you should do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to set these things up. I think it's this. And I have had a few nurse friends that are like, dude, fuck that. I don't want to make that decision. I feel like I'm making decisions for people's lives, which you are. And like, that's typically not what a nurse does in a hospital setting. Now, I'm sure that's doing a disservice to like some nurses out there in some rural hospitals and stuff. But for the most part, I would say that that's true. Um, and I think as a medic, that's the part that burns you out quickly. Like that's where the stress comes from is like, I'm making this decision. And when I get to the hospital, the doctor's going to assess them and either be like, good job, or like, who the fuck gave you a paramedic license? Like all that kind of stuff, right? I think that is always like a looming anxiety in our career, especially when you get like a hot call or a call that's really critical. And so I think paramedics go to nursing for that reason too. Like I have to make less decisions. Doctor tells me to do it. I don't care that I don't agree with it. Doctor told me to do it.
Okay.
Cool.
And that's related to being under his scope of practice.
Yep.
If anyone gets sued, it's him.
Yeah, which we're all like, even as a paramedic, I'm under our medical director scope of practice. So there's a medical director here in Fremont County that he goes, hey, he tests us all, he signs off on us, and he basically says, you can operate under my license. He's the one who sets our protocols, tells us how big our scope is within that national scope, and all that stuff, tests us every few months. When we run a bad call, he's the one who calls us. When we fuck up really bad on a call, he's the one we talk to and say, hey, I know you don't agree. I know you heard what happened. Let me explain to you my side. I had this patient. I did these things for these reasons. And most of the time they're like, cool, that's great. Right. But if you really made a bad call, you said, I did this because I panicked and didn't know what to do. They're gonna be like, okay, let's have a conversation about why you did those things. Or is this an education thing? Or is this like hey, maybe this isn't going to work out kind of thing. Right. I am operating under his orders, but it's his protocols. He's kind of given me a, if this, then that, make your best judgment. But here's the guidelines of where I want you to be.
But ultimately, in a hospital system, typically a nurse is working with a patient the doctor has seen at least once.
Yeah, sure.
For you, you're working with most of your patients. A doctor is uninvolved until you get them to the hospital.
Yes.
So it's a totally different flow of information.
Yeah, for sure. That is honestly the part I find the most fun is like getting the information out of people. Like it's really strange. And I encourage everyone to do a ride along in an ambulance sometime. Like I do think it's like a super perspective changing experience, but some people don't think about is I walk into people's homes when they're having a crisis. That's really weird. Imagine if a stranger just walked in right now and was like, when's the last time you pooped, John? You'd feel a little fucking awkward, right? Like that's such a cool part of the job to me is like being able to walk in and being like, how can I win this person over, get them to like me, and get them to tell me everything about their life in the next 30 minutes? It's odd. Like that part just like feeds that like part of me that like loves making those connections with people. Right. Like I love that. Like, and sometimes it is heartbreaking. Like I talk a lot to the EMT students I teach, like sometimes you got to leave your soul at home a little bit. Right. Like if every patient I see is close to an alcoholic, every patient I see is usually below the poverty line. Like there are all these factors that everybody has this sad story. You're not calling an ambulance because your life's fucking great. Right. If I got caught up in everybody's sad story, it would tear me apart.
Sure.
And I can't do my job effectively if I'm torn apart.
Right.
Right. So there is part of me that needs to be like, okay, cool. Got it. Like you have these issues. So does everyone else. There is empathy there. I am talking to them sweet, but it's in the way that I imagine a therapist would kind of need to, some of the baseline level stuff I need to get past. And when we hit the real big stuff, that's when I can really get personally invested in you. Right. Like obviously somebody calls me and, they're an alcoholic, they relapsed, all that stuff, I can empathize with that a lot more. And like, that is your acute problem maybe. And you might be having symptoms because of it and the alcohol's not hitting right. But like, there is a level of empathy and humanity that I have because this is an acute issue you're trying, but
so you need to be able to like build bridges with people, but in a way that you can retreat back across the bridge.
Yes.
And
100%.
say, yep, I dropped them off at the hospital. I know that they have all of these concerns and all of these problems. And I know that they have marital problems with their kids, problems with their diet, problems with their medications, problems with their job. I figured out all that in less than an hour. And now I'm basically going to leave them at the hospital.
They're a stranger.
And sort of not think about them again.
Yes.
Sort of.
I couldn't tell you most of the patients I've ran the past 3 weeks. Couldn't tell you. Like,
even though the moment you drop them off, you could relate almost every detail they had told you.
Yeah.
So you have to develop almost this short-term memory.
Kind of, yeah.
You have to develop this chalkboard that you're really good at erasing.
And I think that's part of the talent is like, how do I be genuinely empathetic towards you? How can I be genuinely empathetic towards you, care about it, and make you feel cared about, right? That's such a huge part of healthcare. So many people are calling because they need somebody to talk to. And like that helping hand and having somebody that's in a uniform, that's calm, that's, going to tell them everything's going to be okay. Like people need that. How can I do that and then forget about you? Right. And not make you feel like I'm going to forget about you. Like, that's my thing. Like, honestly, this is something I just thought of. Like, I'm kind of like a really good stripper, when you're there, I make you feel like, yeah, I'm definitely going home with you. Why don't you get the room? Yeah, I'll take your hundo. Like, sure, I'll call you, and as soon as you fucking leave, it is on to the next one. You know what I mean? Like, that is kind of how it feels. Like, I do want to form that genuine connection with you. And I do want you to feel good and that you're safe with me and that I'm going to help you.
Yeah.
And then I want to literally not remember your name afterwards. Right. Like, and you'll meet you probably.
And you're saying that second part is actually a skill in your profession so that you can then get into the headspace for the next patient or just be able to go home and be a normal human being for the people in your life.
Yeah. I talk about this with my students. I say, when I go to work and I put on my uniform, I'm a paramedic. And when I take off that uniform and come home, I leave most of my uniform in my locker. Like when I leave work, when I walk out that door, I'm not a paramedic anymore. I'm Dominick.
Yeah.
Right. And a part of my soul comes back when I leave. And a part of it leaves me every time I go. Right. Like that's what happens. You're not going to meet an experienced medic who, in a fatal car accident where there's like, children dead or something like that, go looking for the names of the kids. Nope. I want you to be nameless dead kid number one. Because that's what's going to make it so I can go to work, so I can go back to station and run that next call for a kid that needs me. Because if I get so caught up on whatever this kid's name was, and I imagine their family, and I imagine the heartbreak, and I imagine all these things, I'm not going to be able to help the next patient. Like there is a level of distance I need. And, I talk a lot with coworkers about, the swimmer's paradox. It's basically, you want a nice body and you go, okay, what Olympic athlete do I really like? And you go, swimmers have the best bodies. They have big delts, big backs. So you start swimming every day. And after 2 years, you don't look like a swimmer. It's because you failed to realize that that guy doesn't look like that because he's a swimmer. He swims because he looks like that. And his whole life, coaches have been telling him, you need to swim. Because look you got these big shoulders and this big back, right?
Oh, interesting.
Sometimes we become who we are because of things. Sometimes we do things because of who we are. And I feel like EMS is one of those professions. I feel like very few times do you meet somebody who goes, nobody is impervious to PTSD. Nobody's impervious to depression. That's such fucking bullshit. I hate it when people try to act like that, right? There's nobody macho enough to be impervious to those things. But I do think that there's people resilient to them. And those people are people in EMS and in fire and in law enforcement, right? I couldn't do law enforcement's job. I couldn't pull somebody over and think, is this person going to shoot me? Is this person going to drive off? Is this person a felon? Might I have to kill somebody? I couldn't make those decisions. That would eat me. I wouldn't know how to leave that at home. I wouldn't know how to be Dominick Sapien sheriff and Dominick Sapien person, right? But I naturally just kind of felt good about leaving medicine at the door.
Interesting.
Right? And so I feel in a lot of ways, I fell into EMS because I already was like that. Right. And I think that that's the common denominator between, like I said, like these kind of weirdos and type A's and all that stuff. Like that's the common denominator is we're all a little resilient to that. And the people who aren't, you do see this high attrition rate because people get in, work for a year and are like, fuck this, everything hurts. Like I'm so heartbroken all the time. And then the people who last 10 years are like, yeah, it sucks. It sucks sometimes. That's life. And I can leave that behind. And like, I do think that that's part of it. And it's EMS in that way has really changed my perspective on a lot of the things I do on like, did I choose this? Like, did I really choose this or did this choose me?
Did I really learn this skill or am I sort of temperament enabled?
Yeah. Did I find this for a reason? Like, did I find this because I was already attuned to it? Right. How much of those things do we just, are we meant to be somewhere? That's maybe a little too philosophical, but for the most part, like that EMS has really given me that perspective on life.
Right. Sort of segueing here, but this is something that you and I talked about, I think, like 2 years ago,
Okay.
and it's come back up a couple of times. But it sort of relates to what you're talking about. You meet these people with these really tragic stories, especially when kids are involved. You and I were having a really interesting conversation about, you said to me that if there was one thing that you could do in the American education system, it would be to ensure that every kid had proper calorie and nutrition access.
Yeah.
And you were saying, hey, we got to start with K through 8. Then we maybe were about high school, but that was sort of your pitch. Um, I realized as I had realized I had this instinctual trigger reaction of, oh no, like that's the family's responsibility, not the school system's responsibility, right? Um, but I was wondering if you could just talk about some of the things you've seen, some of the things you grew up with that has helped shape that impression and that belief in you. And I would love to dig back into it.
For sure. Yeah, I say, yeah, first thing I would do, like if I had the chance to like change the country in one go, it would be making sure that no kid went home hungry. Like no kid was ever hungry, right?
Mm.
And I think that sounds really good, but the practicality of it is where people get kind of caught up, right? Nobody thinks that there should be hungry kids. Um, but yeah, and that comes from a place of, listen, I'm a fucking white kid from the suburbs of California. Like I have no business. I do not relate to people who were food insecure. My house always had a full pantry. My parents fed me every day. I had a home cooked meal. Like it was great. But I had a lot of friends who came to my house and that was where they ate, right? And my mom always loved being that person that fed other kids. And just growing up around Sacramento, right? You do see kids that they don't eat, right? They don't go home to a home cooked meal. They're going home to maybe a Stouffer's lasagna or maybe leftovers, if stuff like that. And that's the people I saw in my suburb that were in poverty. I couldn't imagine the people who were in the middle of South Sacramento that was like true below the poverty line, like food stamps, paycheck to paycheck, electricity's not on every month. Um, and so it always felt near to me that I had friends that it felt as though if my mom wasn't feeding them dinner, they wouldn't have eaten.
Okay.
And that's kind of, I think, where the compassion came from, right? In the way that like I can't separate myself from that.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think it is funny you bringing up that my first thought is like that's the family's responsibility and stuff like that. And I do understand that perspective.
Yeah.
And it's something that I talked a lot about with Ben, Tom's brother, for the listener. I wanted to throw that in at least once.
Shout out to Ben.
Yeah, shout out to Ben. Is the difference in kind of that is kind of like a political mindset, right? Like as soon as we kind of politicize, it's like that's the family responsibility. Do I really want to pay for that? Is that the school system? All that kind of stuff. And I said, the reason you feel that way is because we live in Lander, this beautiful family-oriented community where a kid knocks on this door right now and says, I'm hungry. He is going to get fed, sent home with leftovers, and invited back every single day. No questions asked. Right?
Right.
So you hear we should pay cumulatively as a community to make sure no kid is hungry. And you go, why aren't we feeding them anyway? Right? Well, that bill gets denied. And California kids in the fucking ghetto of Sacramento, which isn't even the most impoverished place in California, are looking at you and going like, how are you fucks in Wyoming, these monsters that want kids to be hungry, right? Like we're watching kids, there's not enough food to feed these kids. Like I can't afford enough groceries to let in every kid to do this. Luckily, I came from well off enough parents that, yeah, we could have brought 10 kids home and my parents would have fed them all, no questions asked, not even blinked an eye, right? Even my friends that didn't have food insecurity weren't that well off, right? Like, and I think that that's where the passion comes from is I get it's a tough sell to be like, hey, you really got to pay it forward for, yeah, there's no, if a kid's going hungry, there's probably some irresponsibility on adults in their lives.
Mm-hmm.
And that sucks that, others who are doing well are going to have to compensate for that. But it's just my personal philosophy that when it comes to kids, it's worth that sacrifice to me. Like it is worth that compensation. I understand that there's an argument for like, then we're enabling that behavior out of parents and we're enabling that behavior out of adults. Totally get that, but worth it if kids are fed. And I think when we feed kids, we we then build up that next generation of like, you're not food insecure. You come to work or you come to school and you're ready to learn and you're not worried about your next meal. You're taking some financial burden off the parents, where hopefully the good ones are getting ahead with that, and the kids are like, cool, this system propped me up. Like, I want to be a productive member of that. Like, I'm giving back too. Maybe that's the thing that gets that kid into college or gives them just enough money to go out there and work and actually save something and chase that dream. I feel like food's such an easy barrier to that, where it gets rid of some of those, you know, you you I talk about all the time, me and Jessica came from a sort of privileged life as far as I'm, white kid, upper middle class family. I didn't have many barriers in the way. I'm not saying things were handed to me. I wasn't handed a business or, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
But you were never put in a hole.
I was never put in a hole. I was never put behind. I started the race at the starting line.
Yeah.
And it sounds crazy, but that's a lot more than a lot of people have. And that's something I realized as a teenager that I had and that I was squandering. I wasn't the best student. And, I got really into alcohol at 13, and I got really into, smoking weed, and I had my first cigarette, early on, and all this stuff. And I had this epiphany one day in my later teen years where I was like, dude, I have it made. I'm starting at the starting line. These guys aren't. Why the fuck am I in the same boat with these guys? Like, they deserve it more than I do. If they had the chances I would, they'd be doctors. Why am I here drinking myself to death and smoking a bunch of weed and doing all this stuff when I have no barriers in front of me, right? And I think about that epiphany I had, and I think about maybe food does that for somebody. Maybe food's that last little linchpin that's like, you know what? I'm not so far behind that I give up. And that's why it's so dear to me, I think. And that's why, like, I really say, like, yeah, if I could do one thing, I would make food free for kids. 18 and under, you never have to go to bed hungry. And I think that that's like a beautiful, beautiful thing. And I get that that's very, not based in reality. There's a lot of logistics behind that, but that's where that comes from.
Well, I think it becomes a question of what do we put an authority in charge of that, or do we put that obligation on the community in some sense? And I suspect that is where most of the political debate would actually center.
Mm-hmm.
You'd have to, like you said, you'd have to be truly biased against a certain group of people to say, well, maybe those kids shouldn't get fed.
Yeah, like,
right. I don't think there are probably people out there. There's always people out there who say, well, if a certain segment of the population can't support itself, it should diminish. I'm not one of those people.
Good clarification. Catch.
But no, well, I think it's important to acknowledge that those people do exist.
That's the argument. Yeah.
Because some people say, oh, no one would think that. And then someone thinks that and says it. And then people are,
sure.
they don't know how to handle it.
Yeah. And I think that's also where the water gets muddled a lot. We're coming off election season. You heard, racism get thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
And I think where that comes from is like, listen, impoverished communities, majority minorities. We could go back. We can talk about systemic racism. We can talk about the long-term effects of slavery. We can talk about, demographics of crime and imprisonment and all that stuff. And it's all this big muddled mess. So when we start talking about, well, that certain percent of the population that is poor should, maybe they should diminish. Well, yeah, you're talking about minorities now.
Right.
And it's not the fact that you meant to say minorities. It's the fact that there is a decent amount of overlap between what you're saying and minorities.
Yeah.
So yeah, taken in the right way, that does lead you to seem racist, right? And stuff like that. I think it's important to clarify that, like, we're talking about just feeding kids. It really has nothing to do with race and all that stuff. It's very much to do with poverty, but we can't have the poverty conversation without having a race conversation and a slavery conversation and a socioeconomic conversation, all these things that, like, it gets too big for any of us, right? And I think that is a huge thing in America, especially right now. We're still in November. Tensions are still a little hot, I think. So
people are excited. Yeah, I remember when we were talking about it, you said, there may be no racists involved, but the conversation will be racial. And I was like, what are you saying? And basically you brought up some of the points you just made, is that it's really tough to talk about many of these issues without race being sort of, if not in the conversation, sort of standing there silently, right?
Yeah, something we're all
Right.
skirting around, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
If you're afraid of having some sort of like race conversation or conversation about slavery and the long-term effects of it in America,
Mm.
you have no business speaking about politics, really. Like you are going to avoid some of the biggest issues that are going to come up. Like that's why every political discourse becomes a social issue, which I'm not saying it shouldn't be. It should be. It is a problem. We did do that. Like we got to talk about it, right? And I don't think we do the worst job, but I do think, uh that is where I talk a lot with Ben, and I say
Mhm.
like, yeah, I think sometimes we get too much into kind of like, I'm so afraid of you saying this thing. Like I'm so afraid of you. You take climate change has been a big one too. Like I've heard this argument recently. Like
Oh.
we're so afraid of. I watched two friends get into kind of an argument about what turned into climate change. And it didn't start that way, but you could tell we were kind of skirting around, does climate change exist, global warming, all that stuff.
Uh-huh.
And the one dude was just like, not gonna have it. He saw that it was going towards global warming, maybe exaggerated, and just shut him down right there. And what that does is stunts the conversation, right? And while like I believe in global warming. Like I think it's pretty well proven. I think the science backs it. Like I'm into that. If you guys were to be like, I disagree, I'd be like, okay, let's hear it. Like let's have a back and forth. Let's look up shit. Like I think so often we're so quick to like call somebody our enemy
Hmm.
and against us.
Yeah.
We don't get to like any sort of ground. And there's this thing called like the middle ground fallacy where like the difference between right and wrong isn't like the truth and a lie. The middle ground between a truth and a lie is not the truth,
Mhm.
right? Like, yeah, sure, there are going to be some topics that like we might have differing opinions on, and there is going to be a truth at the end of that. There might be. I don't think that's every issue. I don't even think that's a majority, but there is some. But I think we have to be willing to explore that and not just be like, okay, I'm right. Like, I'm more than happy to sit here and listen to. You believe in flat Earth? Okay, let's talk about it. Like, let's. I really think you're wrong on that one. I think by the end of this, we're going to come to the truth, which is my side. But I'm also willing to say, hey, I'm open to the conversation, even though I'm skeptical of it, that you have the truth and I don't.
Mm.
And I think sometimes we get so caught up in not wanting to have that conversation that we shut people down, which actually puts people in that conviction more.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like if somebody has a conviction you don't like and you just fucking like yell at them for it, that's not going to get them to not have that conviction. It's going to get them to double down and think you're an asshole in the process.
How can
You
I work harder to get more evidence that I'm right?
Exactly,
Yeah.
right? Like how do you make somebody more biased than when you're calling them a dumbass for it? Now all they want to do is prove you wrong,
Yeah.
right? But if you were like, I respect your opinion as an intellectual, but I do disagree with you, like here's what I have. Then you could actually, you may not get somebody 180 and be like, you're totally right. I was so wrong. No, but at least you like, they'll be thinking about it tomorrow. And you'll be thinking about some stuff tomorrow. And if your conviction truly is right, you're going to look up stuff that's maybe not completely proving your point. And at the end of it, be like, no, I'm right. I stand firm on this. Or, hey, maybe I wasn't as right as I thought. That person will do the same. I truly do believe that. And I think that, you know, political discourse has gotten a little bit away from that recently.
Well, honestly, this is where I would come in and plug the liberal arts, the intellectual tradition that Tom and I both experienced at Wyoming Catholic. Frankly, Wyoming Catholic College, I think a lot of people see the Catholic in our name and they assume that they're just raising another generation of God-fearing, gun-toting, skirt-wearing, Bible-believing, righteous Christians.
It's crazy. That's what every single person that's like from California that I'm friends with, like when I'm like, oh yeah, all my friends like went to Catholic college and stuff, they're like, what the fuck? And I'm like, oh, that's like my entire friend group is all these people who went to like a Catholic college and stuff.
Right.
And that's just not my experience,
Yeah.
But go on.
Well, and I just remember junior year, we were reading Chaucer, and of course, growing up in Puritan New England, any mention of sex or drunkenness or really any vice, we were taught, and it was part of the culture. You just really skirt around it. And then we come to Wyoming Catholic, and here we are reading Chaucer, which is full of infidelity and drunkenness and violence and all seen through a lens of humor, right? Like, oh, isn't it clever and funny when we use our language to imply that some man is being cuckolded,
Yeah.
and then the next year we were examining like evolution and frankly, again, many of us were coming from this very uh, traditional, I'll say,
Yeah.
American traditional Christian background. Evolution, down with evolution. And it was actually our professors who were like, actually, evolution's got a lot to be said for it.
Yeah.
Let's examine the evidence.
Hey, have you ever thought these things aren't mutually exclusive? And you're like, no, I
haven't. No, exactly.
Exactly.
Oh, I haven't thought these things aren't mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
And that's actually how one of my professors put it precisely. He said, the strange thing about the debate between evolutionists and those who believe that the world was created by God, the strange thing about them is that they actually agree at the very root of the argument. And we're like, what are you talking about? He said, evolutionists and creationists agree that if evolution happened, God can't exist. And the problem is both sides believe that argument or that premise.
Yeah.
And from there, that's where the conversation really breaks down because everyone feels so defensive. And that's what I really appreciated about the liberal education I received. And Tom, you went there as well, is that there was an ability to straddle the middle until the evidence was really arrayed in front of you. And it was super powerful. Unfortunately, it also, and I've said this term many times on these episodes, is the pain of prudence, right? It forces us to not toe a party line on all sorts of issues, right? Like, how do we feel about evolution? How do we feel about abortion? How do we feel about the death penalty? How do we feel about capitalism? It makes it impossible to toe the typical party line on one side or the other.
Yeah.
We have to say, well, let's put some evidence in front of us, and then we're going to have to make a prudential call.
Sure.
And so, in a way, the properly educated liberal artist will sort of be politically homeless all the time.
Sure. Yeah.
Because there'll always be issues that they're like, well, I can't really get on board with the Republicans on this or the Democrats.
Yeah. What's super funny is, in the same way that you say, oh, I went to the Catholic college and we're this gun-toting Bible thumping, I think like being from California, like I do kind of feel that like in the ways that California is good, because it is like progressive. So like if something's going to happen as far as like human rights, civil rights, it is probably going to start in California. You know what I mean? These places that just have like a melting pot of people more than other places because there's just so many people there, right? Mm-hmm. And that is a good thing. But I think sometimes
it's also coastal, right? I mean, there's
sure
people coming from all over.
And I wasn't necessarily in the coastal region, but it's still more popular. I mean, the Sacramento County has more population than the state of Wyoming, right? Like there was more people in my little town than there was in like 3 cities here. You know what I mean? But I think the pitfall we fall into is we just kind of like assume because we come from that place that like we're on the right side of things all the time or that we have the right way of thinking.
Okay.
And I will say that like living here and talking to people that are more conservative, that are more on the right, maybe I definitely haven't switched my view to like, I would say be like, oh, I'm more Republican in these ways, but I have definitely been like, oh, I get it. I think growing up in California, I always had this sense of like someone has to be the enemy, right? Like this is a caricature for sure. But I think there is this like vibe of like, conservative Republicans are this like, they don't care about mothers. They don't care about women's rights. They don't care about they care about the unborn. They don't care about babies. Right. They love the kids until you actually have them and then they don't give a fuck. Right. Like all these kinds of things. Right. Like these are actual things like I've kind of heard and like is the sentiment. And I think moving out here, like you kind of have that defense up. I heard somebody the other day tell me like, because I was talking about, a conversation me and you had, Tom, where like we were debating about something. And I was just like, yeah. And at the end of it, it was cool. And then we both walked away with some good perspective. And they're like, you blew your cover as a secret liberal. And I was like looking at him and I was like, yeah, that is kind of what a lot of people do here, isn't it? Like they're these secret liberal, like, yeah, you assume, but it's never talked about. Right. And I think out here has given me so much perspective of there is no enemy. Now, here's the thing. I'm going to add a little fucking asterisk to that. Nazis are not cool. I'm firmly anti-Nazi. I'm fucking anti-KKK, right? leave with that shit, right? But for the most part, I don't think that's Republican. I don't think Republican and Nazi and Republican and KKK fucking are this perfect circle Venn diagram, right? Is there overlap between some fucking conservatives and some Nazis? I'm fucking sure. Just like there's the same in like, there's probably some fucking communists that are liberal. Like that just, duh, that's going to happen, right? But I think the perspective I've gotten out here is there is no enemy. Like your average person isn't your enemy. They're not your complete rival. Just because they're on the opposite side of this political spectrum means they have a different opinion on the means to do something, not that something's a problem. It's how do we raise the money? How do we spend it? You know, it's not that, hey, you know, kids are hungry. How do we fix that? Hey, you know, the budget, food's getting expensive. How do we make that cheaper? You know, all these things. Yeah, we're not enemies in that. Like that doesn't make us enemies because we disagree on the means to do something, right? That just means we have different opinions. There's some way we can work this out for each other. And I think that the more conversations I've had with my friends that are conservative, I've grown to kind of appreciate that difference, even though I may not always agree with their side of things. And it actually like really upsets me now when I hear like, you know, secret liberal and stuff. It's like, why are you secretly liberal? That's kind of the problem, is like, when you stop being like, this is the way I view the world, show me something else. That's when you can't come to a conclusion, right? That's when you get in this kind of echo chamber, you know, of, oh, this person's right, this person's wrong, I'm right, they're wrong, these people are racist, I'm not, you know, all these
There's
things.
no engagement, you're saying.
Engagement. Like you don't even know if your friends are racist. Listen, I've had friends that were super fucking racist that I didn't know because I thought we agreed on shit. And I was like, oh fuck, you really don't like black people. Right. And then I've had friends that I'm like, I hope they don't say nothing racist. And then like someone says the N-word and they're like, hey, don't you can say that word. And it's like, whoa, what the fuck? Like that flipped it on its head. Right. So like you can't tell because people are people. We're dynamic. We're interesting. Right. Yeah. You have to talk to them. You can't hide those
some of us
parts about yourself. Some like you can't hide those parts about yourself. Like the more talk, and the people who are like, oh, if you're fucking, you know, Republican, get out of my face. Like, no, I never want to talk to you and stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, that person was never going to have a conversation with you. Right. And once again, if somebody were to tell that to you, that wouldn't make you less Republican. You wouldn't be like, damn, this one person really doesn't like me. I'm going to totally rethink my entire worldview. Like, that's not how it is. Yeah. How you get somebody to think about their life and like the way they view things is through like compassion and love. And like, I would want to change more. I would want to think in the way you know, you did if I loved you. And if I wanted to be your friend, and if I thought you were so generous and kind to me and listened to me, I would want to give that back to you out of a respect, out of an admiration, out of like this friendship, right? Yeah. That's how you get people to find a middle ground. That's how you get people in like kind of the moderate side. That's how you come with this ebb and flow of like, oh yeah, okay, I guess I'm a little more pro 2A than I thought I was, you know, all that stuff, because I'm willing to listen and look into it because you've given me that, right? Like, you know, I look at the political discourse we have today, and I think to like, you know, Martin Luther King and figures like him, where these figures come at a time of this huge just civil unrest. It seems like we're on the brink of like civil war and stuff like that, and comes out and says like, no, we're not violent. No, my dream is not that we eradicate racists. My dream is that one day little white boys and little black girls will hold hands, right? It's a message that has nothing to do with an enemy, has nothing to do with what makes us different, has everything to do with what unites us. And I think we are so due for figures like that. And I think in a way we can be figures like that in our own little bubbles, like we are in, you know, here in Wyoming, stuff like that, that is how we exact change. That is how the world kind of changes, is by having that mentality of like, yeah, through this commonality, we find integration and things like that, not just with, you know, obviously Martin Luther King is with races and stuff like that, but with ideas, you know.
You think MLK's gift was he saw these two sides really head to head, and he was able to go off at his own right angle to both of those, but at the same time still show strength in
strength and conviction,
strength for what he believed his people truly needed.
For sure. Yeah. Yeah. It was firm that he fought for something, and, right. And he wasn't moving on that line. It was, get rid of, blacks only water fountains and get rid of segregation and let us sit where we want to on the, like, it was a firm line for sure. He said, I am on the right side of these things. Just because you're not does not mean you're a monster.
Yeah, that
Right?
is interesting. How do you balance, you could say, oh, we need to talk and dialogue and have compromises and right. But it's like you can't you can't really say, oh, we'll compromise by saying blacks can have a seat on the bus, but we're going to keep the colored water fountains. You know what I mean? You
Yeah,
can't,
there is no compromise,
you
right?
can't really compromise. Like,
The middle ground between right and wrong is not right, right?
Right.
It's the middle ground fallacy.
yeah,
And
yeah,
and I think that that's why we're not Martin Luther King, because like that is something beautiful that somebody could do that, have that conviction, and yet still be empathetic, compassionate, make people feel heard by him.
yeah.
That they come to that side, even though he's holding a firm line that like you are fucking up. Like that's beauty. Like that is, there's something so powerful about that message.
Mm.
And I think we're due for that. I really do. Like, I think America is due for another one of those figures that's like, hold on, here's the line. You're not on the right side of it, but that's okay. There's
But I
plenty
don't
of
want
room.
to. But I don't want to kill you.
Yeah, there's plenty of room.
Right.
You're not my enemy.
Right.
You're my friend. You just don't know it yet.
Yeah.
Right. Like
yeah.
we're so due for that. And I really think it will be like a civil figure. It won't be like a political figure
Oh,
or anyone we know. Like, I think all the times that we find these, they are just like, hey, Martin Luther King was this great pastor that just like really resonated with people and started doing speeches. And here we go. Now he's involved in politics, stuff like that. I think it'll be another one of those where it's like America latches on to somebody that's just this fucking person, just this guy who has a great idea, has a great message, has a great vibe that doesn't matter what side of the coin you're on. You're kind of like, fuck, sounds good though. Like I feel something,
I want to be that better version of myself.
Yeah. I think we're due for one of those. I really do. And I'm a political optimist where I do think it's coming. Like I refuse to be one of those people that's like, oh my gosh, the world's going to shit and we're going to do this and that and this and that. It's like, dude, that's how people have been feeling for the past however long. That's nothing new. Don't worry. We'll get through it. It's just a phase, It's
because you're not Irish.
Exactly. Yeah, dude.
Yeah, that's funny. No, I think you and I were talking one time about how we can find like old Sumerian scripts, right? From 3000 BC in which someone is saying, "Oh, the coming generation does not appreciate the heritage they've been given and will surely drive this world to the ground." And this is 3000 BC that people are like, "Oh man, as soon as we're not in control anymore, the whole thing is going to go to pieces." Yeah. So it is interesting about MLK because I do believe in someone once said to me, and he was a Catholic, so he was sort of talking from this Catholic perspective, but I think could be applied to anyone who has a message beyond sort of a competitive striving. He said, there is something insufferable about a saint.
Yeah.
And my gosh. And what he meant is like, if you're the type of person who's not just, I'm just on this team and I want this team to succeed at the cost of these other teams.
Yeah.
If there's someone who says, no, this is the right way to live.
Yeah.
And everyone needs to learn something from that. Frankly, most of those people, if their message is genuine, they have to plan for martyrdom, right? Yeah. Because they are insufferable, right? Socrates, insufferable, right? MLK, insufferable.
I forget who I was reading. Oh, fuck. I don't remember the book, but it did say the role of the philosopher and the sage is to basically come up with those world-changing ideas. The role of the leader is to get people to understand it, right? Like the role of philosophers, sages, saints, I would even put in that category, isn't to get you to like it. It's to tell you what it is, right? The role of the leader is to help you understand, right? That doesn't mean that they came up with the message. That doesn't mean that they, have it down to a science. It means that they're able to speak to you in a way that you listen.
Right.
And that is not the job of the saint. That is not the job of the sage. That's not the job of the philosopher. It's to come up with the solution.
Mhm.
whether they like it or not, whether it gets you pinned to the cross or not.
Mhm.
It is the message. And that's it. I'll die for it. I'll be the martyr, whatever. That you exist in a as a martyr, as a saint, as all these people, you exist on that plane above what people enjoy.
Mhm.
The step below is leaders. The step below is, I guess like prophet. You know what I mean? Like I'm going to
Right.
you
I'm
and
going to point the way.
I'm pointing the way, and I'm not going to stop until you not only know what it is, but you like it.
Right.
Right? Like that is the goal of those people. And I think that right now we're in need of a little of both of those two upper ones, which is a shitty position to be in. But like, yeah, I do think, God, it kills me that I can't remember the book, but yeah, I do think that is the structure of things. Like the people who get you on board with the ideas are very few times the people who come up with it.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? They're the people who understand it and get the message and understand how to reach people with it. And I think sometimes to come up with those ideas, to be those saints, those philosophers, you do need to kind of take that human factor out and say, well, what are people willing to what are people ready for? That really can't be a question because you're thinking about a bigger picture. You're
Right.
thinking about something beyond you, beyond maybe even your entire life.
And beyond your generation, right?
Exactly.
There may be no one in my generation ready for this.
There may be nobody in your bloodline, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like the goal of like a philosopher or a saint or a sage is not to please anybody. It's to find a universal truth. It's to find the answer beyond what I may like, what you may like, what the world may like at the time. It is what the truth is.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it conviction. You know what I mean?
I think that applies to, and I think that spills over, and we see that in other people's lives, like the great artists. Right? I mean, Van Gogh committed suicide. Uh, Monet only achieved some level of success late in his life, and he died very young. Um, Flannery O'Connor died young and relatively unknown, right? So I feel that these artists might have something similar going on, that they're sort of spoken to by the muse, right? And they have something for the world, and in their own lifetime, the world's not really ready for it, right? I mean, Van Gogh died. I mean, he committed suicide, so it's sort of an exceptional case, but he died
He did
miserable
die,
and penniless.
Yeah.
Right. And then only later did people discover, oh, there is something
There's talent.
truly channeled in his art. And it combines that the orderliness of the trained artist, but it combines this wildness that you could only get once in a generation.
Yeah.
So that is just, yeah. It's insufferable about the same. Should we take a quick break?
Oh, sure.
Cool.
Right. And so, like, what a great idea to every time I am laying in bed and I'm thinking about the thing I did in the fourth grade, right? I go like, what would the man I'd like to die as do in that situation? What would the person I'd love to be remembered as be thinking about, or how would they have handled that? And that's what I write in that book, right? I'm writing my own meditations on at the end of my life, when I look back on this, am I going to read these pages and go, that's me? Or am I going to be like, oh, I still wish that was true, right? And I think it's so important to like take accountability of those little nicks in our character and stuff like that, and try to come up with, who would I be if I didn't have this? Who would I be if I handled that better? How would the perfect me have handled that? And I found that to be like super beneficial to overall growth in like character and like who I want to be and all that stuff, which can sometimes be a little scary. I think sometimes I fear about being a different person at the end of all that, because you like who you are. You know what I mean? You don't want to change too much. We get so attached to the flaws we have because we're not sure who we'd be without them. Right. And yeah, but that's definitely something I'm super into, is like that applied philosophy of, how does this fit into my life? How can I read from others and say, whoa, that's true to me today, right now.
Yeah, because I got really into it when I started following a lot Alex Hormozy a lot more. Because he always puts everything, he has like, he calls them his mind frames. So he's like, he looks at something, he's like, okay, messed up. What can I do? What's the lesson I can learn here?
Sure.
What do I say to make it sure it doesn't happen again? So he's very like regimented of like,
Yeah.
I made this mistake. What do I do to get out of it? You know, like this thing is like, I used to be really distracted. It's like, how do I get undistracted? I put earplugs in, I put
Yeah.
headphones on,
Yeah,
I
for sure.
sit in a black room and I just do my thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I guess to me it's so interesting to think about because maybe it's just being more of a guy. Maybe guys like regimented, like what's the rule we have to follow to get to the goal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we want to be clear on what that thing is so we don't miss the goal. We don't
Yeah.
come short. I don't know what it is, but
I don't know. I think that's human nature. I think we're all chasing that stuff. You know, like I think you talk to any girl and you know, maybe it sounds different, but it comes from a place of like, fuck, I don't want to miss it.
yeah,
Like, is there a chance that I'm missing out on the best me possible? Is there a chance
right.
that like, you know, and I think now it's probably maybe cranked up to 11 as we get like hustle culture and we get this focus on like optimization and how to fucking sleep 1% better every night. You know, like these fucking great taglines. But I do think that like,
Who's gonna carry the boats?
yeah, who's going to carry the boats? Exactly. Like we are hit with this a little harder of if you are not improving yourself all the fucking time, you are fucking it up, right? And I don't think that's how improvement works. Really. Like I do think I think if you're looking for it, you're going to find it, right? And maybe that's just optimism, but I truly think if you're looking for a better version of you, you're going to find it. I think the people who pass it by are the people who realize that a little too late when there's no time left, right? As long as there's time, you can change. You got it. You got a day left. Give it all away. You know, be a better person for that one day, and you're going to die a better person, right?
Hmm.
It's only when that clock's run out that you really have failed, right? Um, you know, a quote, something I always tell to my sorry, I'm just fucking
No, you're
rambling.
No,
good.
you're
I
good.
just want to make sure we
No,
got this.
something I always tell to my wrestling kids is just like, yeah, losing and failure are different things. You lose. Losing is part of life. Losing is part of trying. Fuck, you got to try to lose. But failing is when you give up. Failing is when you decide that loss was it, and I'm not even going to try to win anymore. Right?
That loss is who I am,
That loss is who I am. It
not something that
defines you.
happened to me.
Something that happens, right? And I think that's the same for our character. I think that we don't fail until there's no time left, right? You can't truly say somebody had failed. They may have fucked up 99% of their life, but maybe in their last moments, maybe their last day, they were a better person than they'd been the other fucking 50 years of their life. They were a better person. They did it. They achieved that goal, right?
That it's interesting because if you look at the understanding of the word suffering in Christian scripture, we think, oh, I'm just having to have misfortune placed upon me, and that's not that is part of it, but there's also this very real sense that suffering is a passing through of a difficult trial.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that you say, like, if we look at failure in a certain light and accept it as who we are, we don't pass through it. So in a certain way, if we want to become that better person, if we want to achieve that thing, we have to suffer, because when we say suffer, it implies this moving through, right? That this is a phase, this is a storm that, again, it is necessary to us, but it's not who we are. And we just have to get to the other side of it. And so, yeah, if you want to become the best wrestler, which you're trying to get your kids to become better wrestlers, you have to say, yes, you have to suffer loss because that's the only way to get to the other side.
Yeah. It's funny that you talk about that, like the biblical sense of it. There are two things. When I turned 18, I got baptized Christian. I was really I've always been looking for some sort of faith in my life.
Okay.
Always considered myself spiritual, but couldn't quite subscribe to the Christian God thing. Like it just didn't feel 100% right. It felt disingenuous to say, I want you to be there. I want it to be true. I want it all, but there's just these little things that I can't. And I don't feel like if I'm going to say I'm devoting myself to a higher power,
right,
that I can have reservations. I feel like that's disingenuous to whatever God's out there, right?
You can't say the Jesus prayer until you've met Jesus.
No, Jesus is a great guy.
Yeah.
Believe in Jesus, sure. I'm super into it. But like, there's always been something about it. There's always been one or two things that I've been like, fuck it. I don't feel it in my whole heart. It might be half my heart. It might be 3/4, but it's not my whole heart. And it feels that disingenuousness taints it, where it's like, it's not quite right. Because I know it's going to be perfect when it is, right? And so speaking of that,
Saint Christopher. Make sure that started sometime.
yes, absolutely. Write that shit down. Remember that. No, but one of the quotes that I was really drawn to at that phase in my life when I was like, okay, I'm gonna like try to say, because my whole thing was like, I want to believe in something. I'm gonna say, you know what? I'm gonna just I'm gonna say, I'm a Christian. I'm gonna say that's who I am. And when I say that's who I am, I'm gonna let that overwhelm. I'm gonna be open to everything. I'm gonna go to church, I'm gonna get baptized, I'm gonna do the whole thing. I'm gonna wear the cross. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna feel that power. I'm gonna fully open myself up to it, and it'll happen. Like, if there's a way to do it, it's that way, right? And one of the quotes that stuck out to me that I really led me to Christianity being an adult was one of the last joints I smoked. And this is I'm gonna have to have Father James forgive me for this one. Bible papers are surprisingly made out of really good papers to roll joints with.
Is that hemp or something?
I don't know what it is, but the little pocket Bibles, the
little pocket Bible.
Oh, dude, you can roll some fucking spliffs out of them. No, so I torn out.
It is the word of the Lord.
Here's the crazy part, though. Me and my buddy David, shout out David, we're sitting on my roof and I tear out a page and I read it and it's Corinthians. And I'm going to horribly misquote it, but it's like, we are burdened, but not broken. We are beaten, but not defeated. It was this powerful quote about like, it's not over till it's over. Like, yeah, it may be horrible, but it's not it. And that moved me like in a way I will never forget. Like the way that verse made me feel. I may not know the words, but I'll never forget was Corinthians and the way it made me feel, right?
Yeah.
And in the same way that you're talking about, suffering is this like it's a passing through. And I was going to church. We had this pastor, and I only remember 2 sermons he did. And one of them was about what is the valley of death or the valley of the valley of death. And he goes, he's talking about the story, and he goes, and he shuts his Bible and goes, what's crazy? We always think we're walking through the valley. Why would you stop in the valley? You're already there. And if you keep walking, you're still going to be in the same valley until you're out. There's no downside to walking through suffering. You're already suffering. And once again, like in the ways that like, that just like, something hits your soul, like in the way that I know something is out there, because when he said that, it felt like he was speaking to me.
Yeah.
And I have never forgotten that. I've never forgotten those words of, why would you stop in the valley? Why would you stop here? There's always another side. That's the fucking point of a valley, right? Like that has always resonated. So I just find it so fascinating that you like brought it to that level, because it immediately just like fired those 2 memories in my brain of just this like very religious context at this time in my life when I was like so open. I was like, flood me with it, like hit me, come on.
Right.
Unfortunately, there was
flood me to the other side of
there was always a little, tainting in there, and I fell out of it. I would not call myself a Christian anymore.
Well, do you mind if I ask about that?
Yeah.
What you say, the tainting or just the reservation, not quite 100%. Is it something that you've found in Christian doctrine where you're just like, man, that sounds goofy or weird or whatever makes it distasteful?
Sure.
Or is it something else? Or is it a mental thing mostly?
I think the first thing is, I think it's a majority of practice. I think the problem I have is most times I've tried to be involved with the church and stuff like that and tried to really reach out. I felt as though humans have tainted it in a way. Like there was no way for me to be like, yeah, I've read these verses and these really resonate with me. And so I was like, well, actually, if you go into the ancient Hebrew, it actually means that we could fucking slaughter the Israelite, like shit like that, where it's like, I read it and I felt this way. Isn't that the fucking point of the book? Like, and it becomes so much more than that. And it feels so tainted by like this intellectualism when it's like, this is spiritual. Like when I read this and I feel this joy and I interpret it in this way, but then I go talk to somebody who is scholarly about it, which I do believe you have to be scholarly about it. I'm not disparaging that, but this is also where it kind of loses me. Is somebody goes, actually, the context of that is this thing that is completely opposite of what you thought, or not even related. You're actually completely misinterpreting that. And it's like, well, fuck, that feels like it takes something away because I felt so powerful about this. I feel like I was interpreting this in a way that like God would want me to. You know, why would I interpret it the wrong way?
Right.
But then you think like, well, that's, you know, the reason horrible things have happened in the world is people interpreting shit the wrong way or all that kind of stuff. And I would say on the pure like doctrine thing, in the pure sense that really like in every way it has been described to me, the Bible does say like homosexuality is wrong.
Okay.
That is something that like I cannot bring myself to get behind. And I do understand that if you want to like call yourself of a Christian denomination, like, and you say, I follow the Bible, it's law, it's God's word. That's what he's saying. And I just have a hard time thinking a benevolent God would say that the way someone was born was wrong. And that's just a tough sell to me. Like I just, those two things have always been like this distance.
Okay.
You know?
So one has been the experience of actual Christians and your ability to dialogue with them about some of the things that have been personal experiences for you, right? Where you feel like you're just not even on the same page. You're kind of getting in the way. You're running interference.
Yeah.
But then the other thing has been across the scope of Christianity, you found, it sounds like one particular dogma where you're just like, nope, doesn't sit right.
Yeah, because
something's up.
You know, you look at like tattoos, you know, thou shalt not mar your body, I believe is kind of like the close to the verse. And it's like, but then you scholar it up and you go, okay, well, context, you know, there were pagans and Jews who were etching themselves thinking that pain and suffering led you to be able to commune with God better. And, you know, when the veil was torn and Jesus died, you no longer had to do that. Right. So no, don't mar your body for God. Right. So, you know, if I get a tattoo with my best friend that has nothing to do with trying to get God's approval or praise, that's not what it's talking about. Okay. Saying you don't need to gorge yourself, right? You can interpret it in this way. That's very benevolent. Like it's accepting of, you don't have to torture yourself for love. It's already there. It's given to you, right? Like that. I'm like, yes, love that. Like, I feel like
don't flagellate yourself.
Yes. Like all these things that like people get hung up on. I have found, you know, certain things where it's like, okay, cool. Like there are ways around it where it can align with the way that I feel spirituality. And when I read it, when I think about a benevolent, all-knowing, all-loving God, that's what it is. But there's the one fucking thing that like, no matter which way we're spinning it, it ends up in, this is the Bible saying this is wrong. And it just, I can't get over that because that's in kind of this way that these two hangups for me are the same is it feels like the difference between what I'm feeling and what this says, right? What I'm feeling, I do believe is God, whatever it is.
Whatever he is.
I feel that spirituality. I feel the same thing. I think everybody's calling the Holy Spirit and all this stuff. I know I'm feeling that. When I look at the mountains, I know that there's something above me and beyond me. When I go to sleep, I dream of a purpose that serves humanity in a way greater than myself. Like I think that the greatest service on earth would be to do something that contributed to this feeling that I get, the spirituality, to contribute to that in some small way. If I could be a servant to that, if I had a burning bush, I would devote my fucking whole life to it. No questions asked. No questions asked. I wouldn't have to get my vocal cords stripped away because I questioned it and said, there's no way my wife's getting pregnant. Nope. Angel comes down and tells me this is what's happening. I'm going to say, yes, I'm going to drop to my knees. Right? Like that 100%. I think that'd be the greatest joy in life. That would be pure fulfillment, right?
Sort of be given the mission.
Yes. But where it is in kind of both these issues is unfortunately, it feels as though there's a direct pull apart from what I'm feeling
Mm-hmm.
and what either people telling me are happening or what the issue is.
Right. Right.
You know, and that's the part where I'm saying my heart's not fully in it, so I cannot fully give it to you. So it feels disingenuous to say I'm a Christian or I'm a Catholic or I'm a this or I'm a that,
Yeah.
because it's not 100% right, and I'm not going to serve a higher power if it's not 100% of my heart.
Wow. It's that distance between the pew and the pulpit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
all it is.
I'm in the pew. I'm in the pew. I'm
I
ready.
acknowledge you're there.
Yeah.
I know I feel it. I know at certain times you have guided my life,
Okay.
but I don't know your name.
Wow.
And that's it. That's
Mm-hmm.
the only hang up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Damn. Hmm. Man, it's so different. Yeah, it's so different for me since I was born into it. I was raised that way.
Mhm.
Um, so it was sort of the teaching happened first. I was so immersed in the teaching before some of those more why would I don't want to call it personal. I guess I'll call I'll call them spiritual experiences happened.
Mm.
Yeah. So it sounds like it was, frankly, I couldn't, I don't know that I could help you from my own experiences.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
There are intellectual discussions we could have, of course,
Yeah.
but my experience probably wouldn't be much of a handrail for you.
Yeah. And it's so funny because my dad is actually Catholic, right?
Uh-huh.
My mom's spiritual, like super hippy dippy, kind of woo woo, which is great, But they both decided to raise me non-religious. And the reason my dad was okay with that was because his belief was, he always said, God will find you. Like, he's like, I believe in a God. I believe in God. Like, and he's real and he's there and you're going to find him.
No.
And that's it. Like, I don't need to tell you that God's real. You're going to figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was just his belief. And I'm grateful and a little resentful for it, right? Like, I almost wish I just believed because it's what I knew, like in ways that feels freeing. But in a lot of ways, in the way that Judaism believes that actually converts are like favored a little bit more, or like have more, are more spiritual or closer to God because they chose, than people who are raised in it is. Like, that's a Jewish belief.
Sure.
Is that like converts are actually a little closer to God because like you found God, like you had no relationship and then you sought it out, found it, and developed it, right? Like, I do think that there's going to be something powerful, because I do think I'll find that, even if it's on death's door, right? I do think I'll find that relationship, but I do think I'm happy about that. I'm also incredibly frustrated at these times in my life when I'm like, fuck, I wish I could just go sit in the pew of a Catholic church and be like, I know you're listening and I know this is right and it feels right, because it wouldn't feel right. Wouldn't feel 100% right. And that's the part that kills me,
Yeah.
And
so you're torn. You feel that you feel the burden of being on the outside, but not quite ready to walk in.
Mm-hmm.
So are you saying that you almost wish you had just been brought up on the inside, so you could at least have the comfort of that structure and that set of,
or at least so like rules. It kind of felt like the default, like even in a way that like I would imagine there are like lazy Catholics who are like Catholic by name only.
Sure.
But at least they have that default when like fucking Christmas comes around, that they're like, oh, thank God I'm a Catholic, Jesus, like, yeah, that must feel great. You know what I mean?
There is something, Pascal's wager, right? Where he basically says, look, we might as well act in obedience and as if there is a God and his divine law.
Sure.
Because if not, what do we have to lose? If so, thank God we checked those boxes so we're not damned to eternal suffering.
Yeah.
Right. His wager was basically saying, look, we're going to miss out on some hedonism, but you know what? We can probably live a decently happy life and miss out on some hedonism and check those boxes in case there is a God. It almost sounds to me as if you're saying, man, you almost wish you had been brought up on the other side of Pascal's wager. Like, your dad was like, you're going to check these boxes, son.
Yeah, kind of.
So that.
Because here's my thing is like, Pascal's wager is great and fucking sound logic, right?
Yeah.
100%. That's actually one of the first thing religious talks me and my dad ever had was that.
Mm-hmm.
And the part about that is I think there's something we're not quite accounting for, and that's if I know God like I think I do,
Hmm.
I almost feel like he'd be a little offended to know that it wasn't all real, you know? That like the love wasn't 100% there, that he knew that there's a little part of me in the back of my head that went like, it's not all right. I'm in the aisle. I'm gonna say I do,
Right,
but
right.
I'm nervous, like,
I'm
right? Like
kneeling, but I'm thinking
to
about
me,
it.
that feels more wrong than being half-hearted in it feels more wrong than not hitching my wagon to it until I know,
Okay.
And,
Because it's so big, it's so important, it's so profound. How could I be half-hearted about it?
mhm.
Right?
If I'm to devote my life to a higher power, I want it to be devoted.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like truly, I believe, I'm married now and all that stuff, but I truly think if I were to have found, religion as a teenager, it would have not even been like out of the realm of possibility to be like, dude, I'd be a priest. I'd live in a monastery. I'd
Right.
take a vow of celibacy and silence. Like, sure. Right. But that's who I am. I've always said like I'll get a tattoo, no problem. Jess never had to worry about marrying me. I have no problem with commitment.
Hmm.
Right. Like that's always been something I've been good at, is like when I'm into it, when I decide, when I jump in, I'm all in.
When you're in, you're in.
Exactly. And I know that about myself, which is why I can't be in on something that's not 100% there.
Yeah.
I feel like we need to get you a copy of the Confessions by Saint. I feel like this is what Saint Augustine dealt with because he was on the fence for like 15 years.
Wow, that's crazy.
His whole life.
His
I
whole
mean,
life,
yeah.
yeah. Because I think it was
Yeah.
he was like 35.
30, between 33 and 35, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah,
So he didn't have the intellectual bearing that he had as an adult, as a kid. So he wasn't struggling and wrestling with it as a kid the way he did in his adult life. So yeah, so 50, in a way, yeah, 15 years where he was like, yeah, I see the appeal, but
yeah. I feel
there's
like he had
something
that
that's holding me
thing.
back.
Yeah, like he was trying to put it all together and just wasn't working. And he's like,
Yeah.
oh,
Mm.
Yeah. No, and I know I'm not the only person going through this, right? It's not like I'm going through this fucking divine struggle.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, it's not to say that, but it is something that like that has been like a theme of my life. Like that is something that like I go back to, that it's always comes up. It ebbs and flows, sure. Like sometimes
Yep.
I'm not as concerned with my spirituality as other times,
Mm.
but I definitely think like I'm in this phase where I'm like, I've just thought about it more, and I think it's
Yeah.
because more recently I've felt it more, like the more I've felt a higher power in my life, the more I'm like, fuck, dude, I really wish I knew your name. I really wish I knew how to
Yeah.
say thanks. I really wish I know whatever higher powers out there knows that I'm thankful and I would and all that stuff, which is what gives me faith in the fact that I'm just not ready yet for whatever reason.
Right.
Sure.
Right.
But it'll come. Like I do have that, in the way that I'm actually critical of a lot of Christians where they talk about like, oh, let go and let God. And then they're the most fucking worried people on earth. I think like,
oh yeah.
I think I'm so good at that. I do that all the time. I don't know the name of my God. And
Mm.
I'm have 100% trust in him.
Right. Right.
100% trust.
You consider the lilies of the field far better than many people who say, I've got a personal relationship
Yeah,
with this
no,
all-powerful God.
I've talked
Yeah.
to many of like Christian friends who I think like, dude, I think I trust in God more than you do. Like, I think I trust that everything's going to be okay and I'm on my path and that the suffering and struggles in my life are meant to make me the person I'm supposed to be and that I am becoming a vessel for something greater.
Yeah.
Like, I have whole faith in that. Everything that has ever happened to me has made me into who I am, which is going to set me up for everything I'm ever going to do. Which
Yeah.
that might not be some grand life changing, I change the world thing. But if I change one person's life, that's good. It's a life well lived. Like I'm so ready for that. And I'm so accepting of that yeah, in a lot of ways, I do kind of get irritated where I'm like, motherfucker, like you have the ways, you have a book telling you not to worry about it.
Yeah.
I'm trusting that book applies to me too. And I'm not sure it does.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. I do think that goes back to a comment you made earlier about anger. What immediately sprang to mind is I do think some people worrying is home for them.
sure.
Right. I will say that was my grandmother. God God bless her.
Yeah.
She just sort of, as soon as one situation was resolved, she'd be happy for a day, and then she'd find the next thing to be worried about. And what was it right? No. Was it natural? Well, to her, yes.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not trying to defend that.
Sure.
But I will say, I think having felt some of that myself, I think I get it.
No.
Right. Where you're like,
Yeah.
yeah, I know I'm supposed to consider the lilies of the field.
And those feelings of frustration come from a pure place of jealousy. I mean, a pure place of jealousy. I like, yeah, it is from a place of, man, I wish I could struggle in that way with God, where it's like, oh, I know you. I feel like I'm not serving you good enough, but I'm doing the best I can. How do I serve better? Like, in those ways, when like, how am I more spiritually fulfilled? But at least I got somewhat of a rubric,
Right.
and I can consult a fellow Christians or Catholics, or I can go to my priest and all this stuff. Like, those are things that, like, when I'm struggling, I'm like, fucking, who do I go to? You know what I mean? Like, what do I do? Like, do I just throw a fishing net out and just start fucking, praying the rosary, fucking bring the malas out, get on my knees, face towards Mecca. Like, you know what I mean? Like, do I just fucking throw it all at the wall, see what happens?
See what sticks. Yeah. Right. And then when miracles happen, who do we give the
then
credit
who do I
to?
pray? Yeah, that'd be just my luck. I get finished with the last psalm and lightning strikes,
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. I was praying my rosary, sitting inside my my Sukkot's tent, worrying my mullah beads. And then I walked out and there's the envelope with the cash.
Yeah.
I don't know who I'm supposed to give thankful to.
Exactly. Yeah.
Allah, Yahweh, Jesus.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
That is another appeal. Like, in the times where I'm like, damn, I wish this was my book. I think of, like, what is it? Archangel Michael, who's just like, I have no enemies that never allow that. I'm like, oh, that's the type of anger I could get behind. Like, that is, yeah.
Right. That line is from No Country for Old Men.
Is it really?
Yeah. Yes. I have no enemies. I do not allow such a situation.
Yeah, but I just remember there being like some biblical archangel who's just like, yeah, I will fucking mow fields of men down.
Oh,
you know what I mean? And I was just like, yeah.
Yeah.
Some of that. Like,
yeah. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle.
There we go. Yeah.
Defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
Metal.
Yeah.
Like, that's the shit I'm into,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or Psalm 144, you train my arms for battle and my fingers for war. Yeah.
Powerful stuff. Like, dude, mar that on my body.
Yeah, right.
Go for it, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, some of the lines in the Bible are like, dang, that's
there's our medal.
Yeah, dude.
Yeah.
I don't know if God said all this shit, but he said that. You know what I mean? Like, that was.
Yeah. Well, my favorite is the beginning of the Canticle of Zechariah. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel. He has come to his people and set them free. I mean, and it's just, and it goes off from there.
Yeah. And just sends it.
But it talks about, the oppression being over.
Sure. Yeah. You read shit like that and you're like, yeah,
that's exactly what we want.
Me being the farthest thing from Jewish possible. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Super into it for him.
Right.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of the Psalms, you read them and you're like, this is pretty violent. You're like,
oh, yeah.
It's like, some of them, it's like, yeah, God's sending my enemies just like by the thousands away or whatever, and it's like,
yeah,
that's intense,
Oh, no. Yeah. The Psalms are not gentle.
They're not gentle.
No. Well, that's honestly much of scripture. And that's actually what many people find offensive about it, is that there's this way in which scripture insists on the scouring of the soul, which is not what which is not what comfortable 90s era Christianity really wanted to emphasize in any way. Yeah.
It's not kumbaya all the time.
Gotcha.
Yeah. The scouring of the soul. And there's a great image of that in C.S. Lewis in one of his stories. Is that this kid, he goes to, it's in Chronicles of Narnia. He goes to this magical island, and this magical island causes the condition of his heart to become his physical condition. Right. And he's selfish, he's small-minded, he's petty. And he becomes this reptilian dragon. right?
Mm.
You know, and again, it's a story. It's, you know,
It's allegorical. It's meant to represent.
and it's sort of not even attempting to be subtle, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just very in
You
your face.
turn into a dragon. And what happens? He is eventually healed, but he's healed because he in his state of being a dragon, he's flayed alive, right? Like they have to peel it away. They have to peel away the hide of the dragon
Gotcha.
off of him, and then the kid is able to come back out. And that's found, and that's a story by a Christian author, but it's found throughout Scripture. So
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. What are you gonna say, Tom?
Well, I think something about the Bible is like it just gives you the real.
Sure.
You know, it's like the good, the bad, and the ugly,
Yeah.
and it's there, and it's like God's like, this is how you deal with it. You know?
Well, and that's God, there's this one dude on Instagram who I think he's like an apologist or something, and like a Christian apologist. And at one point somebody brought up the gay thing. He's like, was gonna say, he's just like, yeah, not cool. Like he's like, it's not saying you hate him. He's like, it's just saying that union's between a man and a woman. Like that's it. That's how we were created. It's not right. He's like, and if you're a Christian, if you believe in the Bible, that's what it says. He's like, and yeah, it's not glamorous. It does not fit with modern sensibilities, but this is what this book says. And if you're a Christian, you're saying, you know, I believe in this. This is God's word. Then that's God's word. It doesn't matter that you don't like it. And well, once again, I don't agree with that. Like in my own, what I feel,
Okay.
I respect the conviction of this is my book. I stand by it. I've tried to find every way to interpret this to fit with the modern sensibility, and I can't because it's not there. That's how it is. I respect the shit out of that.
You respect people who are able to say, I have to depart from my peers.
Yeah, that's what devout mean. That's what devotion is. That's what submission is. Like that is it. And I respect that. I can respect that submission to it. Now, I think a key theme in that is we don't hate gay people. It's just not what the Bible says is correct.
I'm curious though, when this teaching was introduced to you, I'm just curious if the people who were trying to explain it left you with the impression that people with homosexual tendencies are lesser or sort of outside the love of God.
Not at all.
Okay.
Not at all.
So you think it was explained to you correctly, which
do.
is we love gay people.
Yeah.
Don't be gay.
Yeah. And I had a very formative conversation as a kid. I was young, you know, it was in the middle of like the gay rights stuff, right in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And I was, you know, my dad, super conservative, my mom super liberal, because you tell they were very on opposite ends of this issue of gay marriage. And my brother had this gay friend, and we're sitting out there, and I'm sitting on my skateboard, and I look at him and I go, so like, is being gay a choice? And I didn't know how else to ask it. Right? Because to me, that's like the linchpin of the conversation. Right? And he goes, Dominick, you like girls? I go, yeah. He goes, you think girls are just like cute and hot and like thinking about sex and all this stuff? I'm like, yeah. Fuck yeah. And he's like, when'd you decide that? Like, touche, Mr. Caveman. You know, like it was one of those things, like he said that to me, I was like, fucking, you're right. I just always knew I liked chick. Like, even as a young kid, before being, you know, sexual was a thing.
Yeah.
I just knew chicks were cute. I knew that they had like cuties and stuff, but it was always kind of this like cat and mouse game where, you know, she's into me, you know, all that kind of stuff. I just knew that. Like, that was just my fucking wiring, you know, that was biology. Right. And he's like, yeah, that's how it happened for me, bro. And I was just like, okay.
I like men.
And to me, I just thought, well, if he's wired that way, then God wired him that way. And if God wired him that way, how could God wire him that way and tell him not to do it?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, change the wires, dog. You know, like that's always how simple it's felt to me. And I'm sure, you know, you guys being much more biblically knowledgeable than me, there's probably more complexity to that. And I'm sure there is more to it than that. But just like, that's how it feels right in my heart, in my soul. I can't departure from that feeling of, but you were born there. That's your default. That's your setting.
Yeah.
If I knew you before you took your first breath,
right,
you knew that was going to happen, dog. Before there was any choice to be made.
Yeah.
Why is it why are we even stating that it's wrong? You know what I mean? Like, I get it. You love me the same, and I can still be accepted in the kingdom of heaven, and I just shouldn't act upon that desire. I understand the concept of it all.
Sure.
Why add the caveat? Why are we adding those stats? Like, like that's the part that I just really cannot, my heart cannot get behind.
It sounds to me as if it sounds to me, you're saying, why would God create people with impulses that have no possibility of fulfillment?
Mm, I'm not sure I'd state it just that way.
Okay.
Because going from like a pure biblical sense, we're born with original sin, except Mother Mary, you Catholics.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Got one.
You got one, okay? You have yours. No, but I get from like a biblical sense, we're all born with sin. We all have this like desire and impulse, and it's not that you can't resist it, but it is like that active choice. You're gonna sin. That's the point of being forgiven and all that stuff. And like gays just kind of rolled in with that. It seems like if you're gay, you're just given that little extra no that I don't even have to deal with. But it's like, why are some people given a harder relationship with God than I am?
It's a really interesting point.
That's where the hangup is for me.
It's sort of, why are they not getting to start at the starting line?
Why don't they start at the starting line? Why would a benevolent God start people behind the starting line? That doesn't make sense. I get how, you're saying, as God, I'm perfect. I've given you, Jesus, a part of myself, but also is human to show you that it is possible, all this stuff. He dies. Just the blood of him makes your sins forgiven. In my eyes, the veil is torn, all this stuff. You can have these personal relationship. You can have, what do you call it? Not concession. It is
concupiscence.
Nope. When you talk to a priest and
confession.
No. Yes, but it is a sort of blank. When I pray to Mother Mary, I'm not praying to Mary. I'm asking her for intercession.
Intercession.
Yes.
Okay.
Boom.
Yeah.
Fucking, I knew I'd get there. Like I we're given all that. But a few of you have one extra step. Feels so odd and just so not in line with the rest of it.
Gotcha.
It feels like everybody's on equal footing now. And yes, some are meant a little more for greatness because they're going to be born with talents that God can use more. And you know what? Sure, there's got to be a hero, right? I get that. But why is there so many people? One in every however many is homosexual or lesbian or bi or whatever. Why wire them that way? Why make it so much harder for you? It'd be one thing if 1 in every million people was fucking gay and they became the Pope. You know what I mean? Then you're like, oh, I get it. Like this was an adversity to then lead them to this greatness. And it was this trial and stuff. But you find so many homosexual people that are raised in these Christian households and stuff that like have this religious trauma because of feeling so disconnected and all that stuff. And it's like, it's almost like it's put this wedge in between colloquially. And then just like on a personal level, that doesn't feel like the love that I can even protrude and be like, you're on equal footing. There's no difference. A benevolent God can surely do a better job than I can. So why is it that I'm kind of being told that there is this extra step for you? Right. Why are you behind the starting? That's the problem. Like that is it. I totally understand that, if you're a good Christian, you are a follower of the Bible, that you don't see gay people as less than, that you don't think they immediately go to hell, that, all these things. Absolutely understand that. I just don't agree with the premise.
Right.
And I think that has been the disconnect between me and like people who have explained it to me is like, oh, I get what you're saying, but in the way that I think politics, we all agree on the premise, we disagree on the means. Yeah. No, I get your means. I disagree with the entire premise of what you're saying.
Right. You understand that God gives people the specific path that they have to walk through, but then you say, but then there's this whole group of people who have this and you're telling me they just have a very weird, unhappy path.
Yeah. And it's not like, the Jewish and stuff like that, who are like, oh, you're all a part of one race, or you're all defined in one geographical location. You occupied the Holy Land. Like there's a fucking common link between you guys that makes some logical sense for why you were singled out amongst God's people.
Yeah.
gays? That's the fucking fishnet you're throwing out right now? Like that also like
That's the group you're singling
you know
out.
what I mean? Like there's no real thread there. It's just this what feels to be an arbitrary barrier.
Mm. Mm.
But who am
It's
I?
like when you're qualifying for a race and you miss your time and you get put on 16th place. And you're like, I got to make up all those cars to get into.
Sure.
But yeah, you're like,
But it was because my car was painted yellow. Like it was for some reason that was like beyond all the other cars. It was like some dude was like, any odd number that ends in a 3, fuck them. You know, like, like you're gonna
Well, actually, don't. But that's the whole point.
yeah, line them up in the back, and it's like, what a weird parameter to place around.
Yeah.
What a weird barrier to put. Like it doesn't even seem congruent with like the rest of the barriers that get put in front of people. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I've wondered about that question because it's like there's been a lot of studies recently that, like over the past 3 generations, more and more people say they're gay or whatever. And Jordan Peterson was talking about this. He's like, this is really interesting. He's like, why is this happening? And he's come to a few different conclusions, but he thinks one of the things that is talked about a lot more, so people question whether they are or not.
interesting.
That builds that idea of like, oh, maybe I'm more attracted to these people.
Okay.
Because like whatever you ask yourself, your mind will tell you is true eventually.
Sure.
And but the thing is like that may or may not apply to like the old Greeks that were gay, because like
Yeah.
that was one of the things like Plato talked about all the time. Like that was a thing.
Yeah.
Guys would just have
Sex with guy. It was just
Yeah,
like it wasn't a
thing.
Yeah.
And then in Rome, that was capital punishment. If that was
Yeah.
found in the camp, that soldier was killed immediately,
Yep.
So it's like it's been around for a long time.
Mhm.
They've been doing it for a while.
Okay.
But
But the Romans
they
punished it in a way the Greeks didn't.
Greeks didn't.
Mhm.
But then it's like now it's like getting rampant, and it seems like a lot of it has to do with like people talking about it a lot more, and then having more younger people think about it without guidance. Like it's like a little kid that's like, I think I should hang out with my friends all night every night for a week, and your parents like, no, probably should be your school.
Yeah.
But if you don't have that guidance, you'll start going down the wrong track and you can get to pretty wild places pretty fast. Like a lot of philosophers had this problem where they came up with this idea, this premise, like Hobbes, Rousseau, all of them, and then they go down this road and then it's really hard to get them back on the road. And you're like, well, what got you there? And it's like these subtle hints. So I'm trying to figure out like why is it? Is it actually a problem inside of them? Or is it thinking about it too much?
My 2 things with that, and I do agree. Like factually, there's more gay people now that are saying they're gay than there ever have been.
There are more people that are out.
Yes.
Than
I will say this. If you look up the statistics of left-handed people, you're going to see this. It's like this very fucking low number. And then it fucking just spikes and then plateaus. Do you know when that spike happened? When the Catholic Church stopped beating the shit out of people for being left-handed.
Wait, what?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. When they allowed people to write with their left hand.
When the church allowed people to write with their left hands, the number of left-handed people fucking sextupled. And then it plateaued because we stopped punishing it. So more and more people, the first few people felt comfortable, and then that convicted more people. But then eventually it plateaus because that's the actual amount of left-handed people.
That's the true genetic expression.
So I truly believe that we see this many gay people because that's how many gay people there are. It's just they're more and more comfortable with gay marriage being legalized. I mean, fairly recently, right? The stigma being lessened, especially in your metropolitan areas, right? Like all these things, I think we're going to see a firm plateau here in the next few years. That would be my argument to Mr. Peterson about the ginormous spike in is it's social acceptance. And on the other token, I don't know about you guys. I don't think I could have sex with a man if I wanted to. I couldn't. I just don't find men attractive in the way. I can look at a dude and be like, that's an attractive man, and be like, that's a hot dude. Like, sure, he's got the 6-pack.
You can look at a man and wish you were gay.
Exactly. Dude, you know how much I
wish I could appreciate that more.
Brother, I got no game in high school, bro. I wish I was gay. No, but Like, yeah, like I could look at a dude and appreciate like a male physique and be like, yeah, you're an attractive man. No way I could fuck a dude. Like, no way. I couldn't. I'm not wired that way. I literally could not find a man physically attractive enough to have sex with him if I wanted to.
Mm.
And I think that's true for all straight men. And I think if you have the potential to be like, yeah, I could find a man attractive enough to have sex with him,
Mm.
brother, you're not straight. You're bi or you're gay. Like,
Mm.
you either just don't care that much and like that's not a barrier to you, or you just are into dudes.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, and I've also heard gay men be like, yeah, women kind of like, I don't know, like women parts just like they're like grossed out by it. And it's like, brother, I couldn't be.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Like, yeah, and that's my thing is like that's where I think like it is truly like a wiring thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure you could find me hundreds of exceptions of like someone quote unquote choosing to be gay or something like that. I'm sure that there are cases like that out there, but I think that is more the exception than the rule. Um,
I will that that may be the case. And I know that it was very popular in the early 2000s when a lot of these debates were happening for certain segments of Christians to argue that gay tendencies were always the result of childhood trauma or um, or certain types of experiences with other men when you were a child, or maybe particularly your father. Certainly, those arguments, that outlook, did not succeed in the population, right?
No.
Whether or not they're true, that I acknowledge they most people don't generally believe that today. I think some still do. But what I will say is, from the biblical perspective, that's not really the point,
Sure.
right? The biblical perspective is at least saying it may be a wiring thing. It may be something else. You are free to debate it. The only claim made by Christianity is that God has said, for whatever impulse brings this, whatever causes this impulse to be real, do not act on this impulse. And I think that's actually one of the things I admire about the best of the Christian intellectual tradition is that it says there are so many things about this topic that we're not even really particularly worried about.
Sure.
This is the only thing that we are going to really die on, which is we believe that this is God's teaching. Don't do this. Why you have these inclinations, it may be worth looking into that. It may not be.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the reasons I find myself a committed Christian, is because I think the intellectual discipline is something that attracts me. That
Sure.
there are certain things, certain questions that the answer could be either, but it doesn't change our belief about the divine law.
Sure. And I think in the same way, like I understand that and I follow that train of logic perfectly.
Hmm.
I have a problem with the principle of it's important enough to say that this isn't cool,
Yep.
but I believe it's a wiring thing and it's
Yeah.
you were born with it. And the motherfucker who's in charge of me being born with it
Right.
made me born with it. You
Yeah,
know what I
yeah.
mean? Like,
Right.
So this maybe the question is, if they're born with it, maybe it's the dad didn't have enough testosterone. when he
there we
was a
go.
Kid.
Yeah.
So dads do more jujitsu and work out more.
Yeah, maybe.
Boys become gay.
Yeah, but yeah, that is the
Yeah.
inherent problem I have. Like that is
Yeah.
that disconnect. And I
Right.
think you guys get where I'm coming from as far as like that. That's a hard issue. Like
Right.
is.
Right.
it is a hard line. It's a hard line for the church, and it's a hard line for me.
Yeah.
And unfortunately,
Right. But we make this claim about a God who is not an absent God, right? That knows the number of hairs on your head, right? Yeah, you knew me in my mother's womb. You knit my bones, right? Yeah, that's all over Scripture, which is God is not
not
a
this passive
divine,
onlooker.
this divine force that sort of set physical laws in motion and then sort of stands by and watches the pinball bounce around. Yeah. No, I get it.
Whatever it is, he's got a sense of humor. I'll give him that.
Can't look at an ostrich and think, man, God must be humorless.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about drugs.
Okay.
Also prostitution.
Okay.
No, this is something that you and I had a super interesting conversation about, sort of in two parts. I think one time we were talking more about the legalization or decriminalization of drugs. Specifically, we were talking about the war on drugs, which of course reached its peak in the, I'm going to say late 80s. But then also a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about prostitution and sort of should we decriminalize it in some manner, since going back to human nature, we know that this is an impulse. With both of these issues, it seems that is a responsible government, is a responsible authority over a community going to have to make some allowances for the fact that human nature, being what it is, there's always going to be this impulse towards indulgence.
Sure.
What can we actually do to actually best rule a community? And is criminalization of certain behaviors always the best answer? Can you just summarize your thoughts, particularly with the war on drugs and the criminalization of drugs, but I think a lot of it applies to prostitution as well.
Yeah.
Sort of what your thoughts on this are.
Yeah. I'm going to start with prostitution because I actually think it's a little easier than drugs is.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
I think prostitution is one of those things where, world's oldest profession, you got to give it props, right? No, I think that prostitution is one of those things that is going to happen, and it's like half of the argument of why people say like, oh, like banning guns doesn't work because like the criminals are still going to get guns and stuff like that. It's like, okay, well, saying prostitution isn't legal and like having this culture that really looks down on prostitution doesn't mean it's not going to happen. What it means is it's going to consist of women who are sold as kids and into sex slavery, and it's going to be abusive, and it's going to be non-regulated, and people are going to get taken advantage of in the most immoral and depraved ways possible, right? Tom, you weren't around when we got into this conversation, but I talked about how I'm a huge advocate of, if you're going to watch porn, you should pay for it, right? You should pay for your porn, right? I'm not saying you should watch porn or any of that, but if you're going to watch porn, pay for it, because free porn sites, basically they contribute to human trafficking. They contribute to people getting sold into sex slavery. And you look at Pornhub, I think it's the most visited site in the world. There's child porn on it all the time because it's a free, unregulated, like, yeah, they're scanning for it, but it's hard to get. It's such a massive website all over the world, all that kind of stuff, right? And it's just ethical to make sure that you are paying for your porn, so that way that the men and women involved in it are, one, making a fair living for what they're doing, two, are not being forced against their will to do this. Like, it's the only moral thing to do if you're going to do this like immoral act, right? Like, it's the ethical way to consume pornography. And this went into a larger kind of conversation with me and John about prostitution in general. And my kind of stance is, I think if we make it legal and we, kind of destigmatize it a little bit in our culture, then it allows us the opportunity to turn it into something that is just kind of a job and not this like depraved thing, right? You look at places like, Amsterdam, where it's a business. It's, yeah, it's still people selling their bodies. And people have moral and ethical stances on that all the time. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the people who are going to pay for prostitution going to kind of pay for it regardless.
That's what's called the Nordic model. Is that correct? Have you heard that term? It's I read it somewhere. I don't know how common that the usage of that term is, but basically you set up a structure in which obviously usually women, but all sex workers are able to essentially be professionals rather than criminals.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's the thing is like, if honestly, if somebody wants to sell their body or be a prostitute or, be a camera model or something like that,
Mm.
okay, that's a job. I may not agree with that's a good career path or that's, moral or anything like that. But that's once kind of going back to what you were saying about the intellectual arguments is like, I think that's irrelevant to the point.
Mm.
I think the point is people are going to do this. This is still going to happen. It is the oldest profession in the world. It's happening here in this country. Why don't we make it a safe place for these people who feel like that is their only option or that's something they want to do? Where it's not riddled with STDs, where there's not drug addicts running it and they're not selling you into sex trafficking and all that stuff. Why don't we make it a safer place to have these things? Doesn't matter if you agree with it or not. I think we can all agree that people don't deserve to be sold into slavery and people don't deserve to, if they're, obviously I'm talking more about the worst case scenarios of this and not the people who choose to go into sex work because of passion. I'm unsure, right? Because I'm sure there are people who'd be like, oh, I get into it because it's empowering and all that stuff. And I know I'm not speaking to that, but that still is a portion of it. This is America. You should be able to follow whatever passion you have, immoral or not. Um, and I also think that, like, yeah, if you get into this because you need money and this is a quick way, you shouldn't suffer STDs for the rest of your life because of it,
Mm.
right? You make it out of this, you shouldn't have herpes the rest of your life. You should have kind of the right to the men who come and sleep with you to be checked for STDs or wear condoms or be clean,
Mm.
right? Like I would never deprive somebody of that. That feels I would feel wrong if that was my choice, right? If it was like, oh, you went into this line of work, it's illegal, and so this man's coming in and he's paid for the service, and if you don't have sex with him, he's going to out you as a prostitute and get you arrested, and you may have a pimp that's you might get killed because of all this, and he's this dirty, fucking gross looking, never taking care of himself. You can't have him take a shower, like all this stuff, like that just feels wrong. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree with prostitution,
Mm.
but I also don't think that the people who are choosing to be prostitutes and these sex workers deserve the lowest standard of living possible, right? Because at the end of the day, regardless of your profession, which is what it is, you're a human being that's entitled to some level of comfort, right? Um, and that's kind of where it comes from prostitution is like, I think decriminalizing prostitution and creating systems in which there's a baseline there's a baseline standardization where it's like, yeah, things are fairly clean and people aren't getting rampant STDs. And it's not this like sad, depressing place. It's just this like job, right?
Yeah, interesting. So you think that would be accomplished through a combination of regulation that would require certain regular health checkups?
Sure. I think the same way they do like fast food, right? Like you can't have like a dirty kitchen that gets like E. coli and salmonella every week, right? Like,
Hmm.
yeah, if you're getting crazy herpes outbreaks in this fucking brothel that you're running in Eastern Tennessee, yeah, you should probably get checked and see what shady things are happening here to make
Hmm.
sure that this isn't happening to your community and to the people working for you, right? Like just turn it into a job.
Yeah. Yeah. Man. Now I've been thinking about this a lot in the broader sense, which is why I mentioned drugs as well. Um, how you know we could talk about whether certain behaviors are positive or negative. I think I would put most indulgence use of sex work as generally negative. I wouldn't want my friends to do it. If I had kids, I wouldn't want my sons doing it. Like I just do
Sure.
see it as negative. Um, but yeah, I'd really just like to know if is the level of human suffering higher when it is absolutely criminalized versus when there is, call it like a pressure release valve, basically a red light district, right? You can't have a brothel in a suburban neighborhood. You can't have it near a school,
Yeah.
right? It was like, but over
Have your
there,
plans.
we're not really going, we're going to allow you to do it over there, and then we're going to have some structure of taxation and regulation on it. Hopefully, the regulation itself would not be exploitive and would actually be
Mhm.
would be positive.
Sure.
I, I guess I could kind of say I think about it in a similar way to like fast food. I really don't think fast food is good for anyone.
Yeah.
But I guess if we're going to have fast food, I think that health inspectors should be able to inspect the kitchens of McDonald's.
Yeah. Well, and
Right.
that the people working in fast food contributing to this kind of concept you don't like.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they're still human beings. They still deserve to be paid. They still deserve to be paid a certain wage that allows them some level of living. They
Mm.
still deserve, if they work full time and are going to school, some sort of health benefit. Like there is something that they deserve, even though they're a part of this, what you consider to be a detrimental machine.
Hmm.
Okay, but they're human beings. It's not like listen, you take anybody at McDonald's working and you go, hey, instead of frying fries, would you like this job that pays the same amount but is a lot more respected in your community? I don't think you're going to get a lot of them that say no, right? Like you might get the one or two people like, no, I just really like working here. There's something about
Right.
it.
Or I just don't want the responsibility of looking after kids.
Sure,
I just want to fry my fries and
sure.
be done.
And you might get that, but in my eyes, that doesn't make them any less entitled to a certain standard, to
Sure.
a minimum standard of living. And I
Right.
feel the same way with prostitution,
Right.
right? I feel like if we turned it into something like McDonald's, where it was just it's a job,
Yeah.
maybe not something that everybody likes, maybe not something that everybody even participates in,
Yeah.
but I do believe that the people who do work in these sex work jobs should be one compensated somehow,
Yeah.
right?
Taken care of.
You're giving away something,
Mhm.
right? And you shouldn't be giving it away. You should at least be getting paid, right? You know what I mean? Like if it truly is like this big immoral act, could you think about it like this. You're doing something illegal,
Mhm.
and you see this in movies all the time where like some dude's like with a prostitute or something, he just beats the shit out of her.
Sure.
Where does she go?
Mm.
She gonna go to a police precinct and say, yes, I'm a part of a prostitution ring and a guy who paid for a prostitute beat me. So then you're posed with this choice of interrogate this prostitute and bring down prostitution ring and or pimp, or get one dude who beat a woman. You know what I mean? Like that's it. Is it puts these people in these really hard spots where you're breaking the law while you're breaking the law, and so they don't even have resources to go to. There is no justice, right? Um, and so yeah,
Right. You would have to rely on your pimp for protection.
exactly. And like that's just horrible. I don't want to put anybody. I don't think anybody should be at the will of another human being. Like like that. Those are the ways in which I think like I think it's an easily understandable concept of like prostitution should be legalized. We should, get rid of some of the stigma behind it. Now, the practicality of that, I'm not sure how that would work, but I do think that the legalization of prostitution would be a net positive
Mm.
for people.
Mhm.
Maybe not in the moral sense, but I really don't know that. Like, I don't know if prostitution rises when it becomes legalized or anything like that.
So that would be probably the biggest concern is, like I said, I think it's a negative thing to do.
Sure.
If it was legal, there is a saying that the law is the master, but it's also the teacher. So if something is legal, people tend to be more accepting of it. I do see it as a negative thing. So
Yeah.
my question would be, if it is legalized, do people who would otherwise avoid it then
Do it because it's legal.
take advantage of it, just the way that no one ate at McDonald's 100 years ago? It wasn't around.
Sure.
Now everyone does. Um,
I would say this to that specific argument
Yeah.
is do you believe that the amount of people, let's say it increases by 50%, which I
Mhm.
think would be more astronomical than it would be, if 50% more people indulge in prostitution even once in their
Mhm.
lifetime,
Mhm.
is that worse morally and ethically to you than the hundreds, if not thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of women that are sold to trafficking, beaten, abused, and used as prostitutes outside of the realm of any morality?
or any oversight of law.
Yeah.
Because it has to be underground.
Is that not a fair trade-off?
Yeah.
That is how I view that.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
50%, 75% more people go see a prostitute in their lifetime. That's a way better ethical ground than people get sold to other people to be depraved, not paid, given drugs against their will.
Hooked on drugs or
right. Like that's my thing is
poison.
like, that is way less morally abhorrent to what's already happening. We're actually downgrading. We just don't see it.
I wonder if like the one thing is so like I think we all can agree that prostitution is an immoral act.
Sure.
So I think the question is, how are women protected more? Is it legalized prostitution or not? I think that question is how are they externally affected by that lifestyle more? I think if you legalize prostitution, then you give people the free will to choose an immoral act. If they're sold into slavery, even though it's worse, they're freely choosing not to get into that. So they're probably better people being sold than they would be if they freely choose that line of work, even though their external circumstances would be better in the legalized prostitution.
So, but I think if we take this and we say, I'm not sure I entirely agree.
Can I try to summarize? I think, Tom, you're saying that someone in a spiritual sense is better off having been put into this situation against their will than they are if they chose it for themselves. So it sounds to me as if you're saying, despite the physical suffering that comes from being forced into this life, they're actually in another way better off because they're not complicit in what is a negative thing.
I understand that, but what I'm saying is, but you're getting it on the other end.
Yeah.
Then the person who is using them as a prostitute is doubly as complicit. Because not only are you using a prostitute, you are using a prostitute that is a slave, that has been drugged, you are essentially raping a woman and paying to do so. You are doubly like I truly do think you stack it up apples to apples, legalizing it and saying, yes, the woman is choosing. If you believe a prostitution is amoral, they are choosing to do an immoral act. And so is the person paying for the prostitute. But now you have on the other end of that, somebody who buys a human being, somebody who sells a human being to another person, somebody who pays to have sex with somebody who pays to rape somebody, potentially underage, right? Like we have.
Right. And how would you even know? It's all underground.
We have way more stacked on the illegal side of amoral because what's happening is so much more depraved than just like, brother, you got horny and you paid for a woman that chose to be there. Yeah, she chose and that was more immoral, right? I understand your point on that. But also it's less potent, right? Like a woman choosing to go into prostitution is far less of a bad decision than a man buying a woman. And a man paying for prostitution is far less amoral than a man paying to rape a woman.
So then I wonder, like, the question would be if prostitution was legalized, then would that lower sex trafficking? If it didn't,
so I was reading about this. I was reading about this, and it seems that it's unclear in the sense that there are studies that suggest it depresses trafficking. There are studies that suggest it increases. So having tried briefly, admittedly, I'd like to look into it more. It seems that there are arguments on both sides of that question. That maybe it increases trafficking, maybe it doesn't.
It's the same. I imagine it'd be the same argument with like gun control, right? You know, there are the same thing. There are studies that say like, yeah, it does decrease gun violence, and there's something like, yeah, but gang violence is the same. So like, gang violence is gun violence. You know, like you have these kind of yes but answers to that.
No, I guess I just think it's important that for anyone who wants to participate in a society that we think through what is the proper scope of law and authority, right? In a way, in the same way that the law governs how we drive, but it doesn't govern how we sleep in our beds, even though apparently sleeping face down is worse for your back, right? Which has some cost on human productivity and lifespan, right? So, it does seem to me that any human authority, there needs to be the scope of its reach and limits to its reach. I'm just wondering how, these are just things that I've been thinking about more and more. And again, not to prostitution exclusively. In fact, it was actually talking with you, Dom, that made me start thinking. It was actually started off with drugs. You say that you think that is more complicated. Is it because of the number and the variety of drugs that are out there in the world? What makes it more complicated?
I think because I think drugs is a fishnet word.
Oh,
right?
okay.
Drugs encapsulate, I mean, liquor's a drug,
Uh-huh.
right? Drugs encapsulates marijuana, which is still illegal in most places in the United States,
Mhm.
to fucking meth, right?
Mhm.
I've never done meth, but I can tell you it's probably not as bad as weed. Um, and that's the thing, is like it's a multifaceted issue, because when we say drugs and legalization of drugs, there is understandably, logically, and reasonable lines to be drawn between what drugs can we say, like, hey, that's on the same vein as like alcohol and cigarettes. And this is, holy shit, this is a hard drug. And hey, this is like a party drug. Who gives a shit? All that kind of stuff.
This is rolling the dice with death. This is
Yeah, listen,
a way people relax.
if I were to break out a fucking dime bag of weed, mushrooms, and maybe like a few tabs of acid, we'd have the best fucking night ever. And it probably wouldn't affect us tomorrow. We'd be fine. We'd go back to our jobs. The chances of addiction are low, unless any of you have very addictive personalities that I haven't learned about in the several years of knowing you. We'd move on with our lives. We fucking do meth one time. We might be doing meth the rest of our lives. I have a buddy who did meth once and was like, brother, my mouth's watering thinking about it. He's like, if you had meth right now, I'd do it. He's like, that's how good it was. He's like, that's how good. He's like, I would do it again, and I know I'd get addicted to it. I am addicted to it. Like, he told me, he's like, I've done meth one time. It was that good.
It
right?
was awesome.
He's like, I am addicted to meth. He's like, I've done it once and I'm addicted to meth, because every time I talk about it, every time I think about this story, I think, could I get meth right now?
I'm just curious, how did he not go back? Just willpower? Just
I think there was access. I genuinely think the barrier between him and being a meth addict was access to meth within the time frame of him like thinking about meth. Genuinely. The
whoa.
look in his eye when he told me his meth story was that of like a fucking dog when you
Right.
wave like a cheese stick in front of it, right? So like that is why the drug issue is more complicated
More
to me than
multi-layered.
prostitution.
Yeah.
Prostitution is prostitution, right? We can talk about like OnlyFans and cam girls and this and that and this and that, but at the end of the day, people selling some form of their body for sex,
Right.
right?
Physical contact, sexual arousal, and physical contact.
Exactly. It's pretty fucking defined parameters. When we talk about drugs, bro,
we're talking about so much.
We're talking about so much. It's such a wide breadth. I think that, obviously marijuana is being destigmatized. I think that's great. I think fucking sell it to everybody, tax the fuck out of it. We're going to make more tax money than ever. And it's only going to be on people that buy weed. And that's fantastic. Like mushrooms, I'm whatever. They don't seem to be very addictive. That's what the research shows. We can use them for like certain kinds of therapy. Ketamine therapy is becoming way more widely accepted, like as a therapeutic mental health thing. I think that that's like an amazing field of research, and it should be maybe decriminalized, maybe not legalized, right? Decriminalized meaning like it makes it easier for if people want to do ketamine assisted therapy, they could do that and all that kind of stuff, because it has been shown to help incredibly with like PTSD, depression, anxiety, things like that. As far as like acid, LSD, Molly, these like, euphoria drugs, date rape drugs and stuff like that. I get the banning of those because, those typically, I mean, you don't get the name date rape drug being the fucking just like
right, being
thing we're having fun with on the weekends, like
being the way I unwind at the end of the
that
day.
obviously, heroin, meth, things like that are like, brother, you are,
Because this has such a profound chance of killing you
yes,
with a few tries of it, or because it's also a certain level of addiction, or both.
both. I think the reason, like, you look at like, Molly, LSD, stuff like that, it's like, yeah, these kind of things are, you don't catch a lot of people that are like, oh yeah, I'm just like taking Molly randomly,
Mm.
right? You might see acid. Acid's something people take like recreationally just for funsies.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You look at some of these day rate drugs and it's like they're mostly being used for like criminal acts to like take advantage of others or stuff like that. Like, yeah, okay, those can be still criminalized, fined, all that kind of stuff. Cause, we talk about like reasonable suspicion in law and stuff like that. Okay. But you look at like heroin and meth, it's like, brother, if I had a little baggie of weed that was just bottomless and we all smoked as much weed as we could until we literally passed out, we would not OD. We could sit here with a thimble of meth and fucking kill all of us. Like, like,
If it hit us the wrong way or whatever.
yeah, like we mainline fucking meth right now, we could die.
Mm.
We fucking snort a little bit of fentanyl, we might die. Right? Like these drugs are so powerful, so high chance of ODing. And if you don't OD, such high chances of addiction that, like, yeah, criminalization makes sense. We are kind of saving people from themselves.
Right.
Right? People are going to get addicted to weed. You have a fucking addictive personality. It is shown not to be like physically addictive as much as other drugs, right? Everything can be addictive. Some people can get, I mean, watch My Strange Addictions. There's people addicted to eating chalk, right? Like some people just like it hits the right synapse in their brain. They have an addictive personality, whatever. It's not inherently addictive and it can have benefit and it can help people with certain things. And, they give it to cancer patients and all that stuff. And that's great. And at the end of the day, smoke a joint, sleep it off, go to work on Monday. You're fine. You're still going to be this productive member of society. Why do we criminalize that any more than we criminalize alcohol or cigarettes that frankly might have way more long-term health effects to you than marijuana would or hallucinogenic mushrooms?
Yeah. That is, yeah, I think specifically about weed, one thing that I think deserves more discussion is we just don't have any particular social norms around it. This is not my own idea. I heard this, someone else commented on this. Like, with the exception of maybe a Bloody Mary or mimosa, we basically have distinct rituals for alcohol, which actually help keep it inside the bounds of help. It doesn't guarantee it by any means, but it helps keeps it within inside the bounds of productive society, right? Generally, we generally only have it with food. We definitely have it after certain times of the day. Again, there are exceptions. It does seem to me that along with the efforts to decriminalize or even legalize weed, it seems like that actually should be paired with a parallel effort to give it certain specific cultural
For sure.
parameters. Like, hey, this is sort of how one does
Yes.
this drug.
Yeah.
And I think this relates to, I'm not saying this is the cultural thing, but it would be something along the lines of what existed in other societies where a wise man, a priest, a shaman would guide you through the use of these
Sure.
consciousness altering drugs. And again, I'm not saying every time we smoke weed,
We need to have our shaman come out.
we need to have a shaman there, but I'm saying these cultural institutions help protect against the abuse and overuse. And I don't see any effort in that as a parallel to the effort to decriminalize these things.
Sure.
But maybe I'm just not.
No, I don't
not
think
keyed into that
No.
part of the cultural conversation.
I don't think that's untrue. I
Wow.
think, but I also think you're coming out of a culture of something that has been criminalized kind of most of its existence.
Yeah,
in
since
like
day
modern
one.
time.
Yeah.
Since day one, right? Especially to the potency that we have marijuana now. I mean, it's no surprise that like, what is it, like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington grew marijuana or hemp or whatever. But it's like, yeah, dude, the weed the founding fathers were smoking wouldn't even get fucking stoners today high. Like, brother, George Washington smoked on some of the fucking kush we got today. He would still be fucking high in his grave. Like, right?
he, he would have charged all the way to England with his army. You know what I mean?
Like alcohol, it has literally existed as far as humanity, as long as humanity has, right? There's three things humans make, and that's fucking a sword, liquor, and some form of bread. You go anywhere in the world and you go to the earliest civilization, and them motherfuckers had bread, liquor, and a sword. Okay. It's just human nature, right? So we've had these rituals around alcohol for the entirety of human existence. That is literally not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
To my knowledge. But yeah, like it's just been around longer. They tried to take it away and we fucking made a sport out of it. Like,
Isn't that
right?
wild?
And
Yeah.
so we just don't have that around marijuana because I think it's our relationship with marijuana is new.
It is relatively new.
Right? Same thing with mushrooms and, fucking cocaine. Yeah, fuck, even cocaine is more culture than marijuana does. At least it's businessmen in suits.
Yeah. Yeah, there might, I wonder if certain Middle Eastern cultures have as long a relationship with like hashish.
Yeah.
Uh,
Like
that-
hookah bars and stuff.
right.
You look
That
at
might
that.
go back thousands of years, but I certainly agree with you that in Western culture, we don't have, yeah, we were sort of in our infancy with it. Um, yeah, no, it's a big question. Certainly, I agree that drugs, and this I think this came out of the 80s. You know, just say no, dare, all that stuff. It just put all drugs under this umbrella, and that may not have actually been helpful in the long
Well,
run.
I always talk about, the first time I ever smoked weed was after the first time I drank alcohol. And I'm going to tell you the exact thought progression that my 13-year-old brain had. So I drank some alcohol and I was like, okay, my parents say this is bad. Like I shouldn't be drinking, stuff like that. And I'm drinking. I was like, shit's not bad. Shit's fucking awesome. A Texas chick I like. You know what I mean? Like I'm so uninhibited. Like I'm having a great time. I'm funnier. I'm this. I'm loosey goosey. Like
I
I'm
like
on top
people
of the world.
more.
I like people more. I like myself more. Right. And you're going around. You're like, this isn't bad. This is fucking great. What else are they lying about? My buddy's like, you want to smoke some pot? I'm like, fucking this rock. What could be better? Right. And then I smoke weed and I was like, this also rocks. Fuck yeah. Like, this isn't bad at all. I'm not fucking, coughing my lungs out. My eyes aren't bleeding. And I'm not fucking having fever dreams. And I'm not seeing demons in the corner of my eye. No, I'm just goofy and chips taste awesome. This ain't bad. This
and
rocks.
I'll take another chip. Thank you
Right?
very much.
No. And so I think we do a disservice. And I think like the just say no and like drugs are bad, like that, like super essentially like straw man vision on drugs did a big disservice because I think there are hundreds of people like me that you were told your entire life drugs are horrible for you. And then your first interaction with drugs and alcohol was super positive. And it gets your brain thinking, well,
Liars.
those liars, like they're not bad. They just don't get it. So then not only are you creating a fucking weird relationship with experimentation, you're also creating this like divide with your parents where you're like, oh, they didn't tell me this for a reason. Like they don't trust me to be responsible. Like I'll show them I'm an adult. Like there's all these intersections. And I think when we talk about drugs, we're talking about youth doing drugs, right? Like John, you decide to start smoking pot. Nobody gives a fuck. You're fucking in your mid 30s, like a productive member of society. You figured it out. You smoke a little pot on the weekends, nobody cares, right? 13-year-old who's supposed to be playing sports and figuring things out and being the healthiest they've ever been and just having a good time starts smoking weed. Well, yeah, we have to talk about other drugs now. Got to talk about gateway drugs. We got to talk about addiction. We got to talk about all these things, right? You as an adult,
They're at the headwaters of their own life.
You understand the consequences to your actions. You start smoking pot, I don't need to sit here and fucking lecture you about marijuana. You understand what addiction is. You understand how marijuana could be a gateway drug. You understand when you breathe in anything but air, the damage you do to your lungs. You have watched people get pneumonia. You have seen people die. You have a relationship with health, right? You have all these things that a young person does not have. You can make an informed decision about drug use. You can make an informed decision about cocaine, right? Like you decide to do cocaine, the long-term effects are not going to be that crazy if you do cocaine once in your life. But there is a chance that you snort so much fucking cocaine, you die, right? You, as a 35-year-old man, I trust can make an informed decision without me sitting here lecturing you on the intricacies and the, horrors that can be of irresponsible cocaine use. I cannot trust a 15-year-old boy with that same responsibility, right? So
precisely because the experience might be that awesome.
Yeah, that might be fucking great. Dude, okay. Let me just put this into perspective for y'all. Work on an ambulance. When people are coming down off of meth, they say they feel sick. They go, no, I'm sick. Like I need medicine. Like the meth's just medicine. It makes me feel better. You know how fucking good a drug's got to be to make existence feel like a disease?
Whoa.
How fucking good does meth have to be to make reality, existence, breathing, living life, the only thing we can do feel like sickness?
Wow.
What does that tell you about how fucking good that shit must
Yeah.
be? Right? Like, so when we say drugs are bad, what we really need to say is like, drugs are unhealthy. Drugs can lead to addiction. Addiction is bad. There's nothing you can be addicted to that's positive. Addiction is inherently negative.
Sure.
Right? You addicted to the gym? Yeah, you probably have some form of like eating disorder or something like that. Like addiction, it has an inherently negative connotation. And it should. Like we use addiction when we are talking about negative things, right? If somebody goes to the gym regularly and has a healthy relationship with it and all that stuff, they have a passion. They have a this. Nobody has a passion for drugs, right? Like that is the problem. I think we run into this rhetoric is a lot of the time we're talking to young people. If I tell you drugs are bad, you don't go, oh, then why do people do meth? And it's like, well, obviously they don't like feel bad. Obviously they're bad for you, right? Context, but also you're an adult. You've experienced things. You've seen addicts. You've done all you have this life experience to draw from to go, when I say drugs are bad, I'm really simplifying a complex and big issue. Young men and women do not necessarily have that ability. Now, I'm not trying to disparage some of the young men and women out there who have seen addiction at a young age and understand that, right? But I also think a lot of them who don't do drugs because they understand the consequence of drugs,
Right.
right?
I wonder if you said to a 14-year-old who wanted to know about like, could be a really great experience in the moment. Could be a great time. Could be a really, really fun experience. It tends to lead to bad places over time. I wonder if they would feel more respected if that was the way you put it to them.
Well, and here's the thing. People say marijuana is a gateway drug. Like this is another big thing. I have a hard time with that because it's not like you smoke weed and you go like, I'm ready for the big leagues. Like that's just not how it happens, right? But I do think there is something to be said for you smoke weed and you go, well, people have been lying to me. Drugs aren't bad. Yada, 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 yada. Yeah, let's try some mushrooms. Well, it's natural. Yeah, weed's kind of natural. Like grows out of the ground. Fuck it. Let's try it. Like it's not the weed did not like fucking whisper in your ear like do heroin. You know what I mean? Like that's not what happened. What happened was you've never had a healthy conversation around drugs in your fucking life. Nobody's ever been transparent to you and said like, yeah, people do them. Addiction's this is that. Weed's not super addictive, but it can damage your lungs. There's these things. It does lower productivity. You can't drive. You still are under the influence of a drug. All these things. Okay, well, what about like mushrooms? Yeah, kind of the same deal. Okay, well, then what about Coke? Okay, well, hold on. Like, now we're getting to something that like you can overdose on, right? Like having those healthy dialogues, I think makes it so that way weed stays weed and it's not like this gateway drug animal. But I think when you start to like criminalize and demonize everything, then that leads for like curiosity. Well, where's the line? Well,
That
what?
would be a really
What's next? What's
interesting
this?
line if you said here's our line between what's criminalized and decriminalized or legal is
Mhm.
can you OD on it?
And I think that's a wonderful place to start. I really do.
Right. And perhaps will there be strains of certain, can you refine weed to the point where you could OD it? I don't know.
Sure.
But I think that would be a really interesting litmus test
Yeah.
is this something that could kill you? If it's something that could kill you, just like guns, cars, and Oxycontin, we're
Mhm.
going to have some serious regulation around it. And alcohol too. If it's not something that can be OD'd on, maybe we have a more lenient attitude, right?
Well, and think of it.
Sugar's not good for you, but we don't regulate candy. No one ever like snickered themselves to death in a day.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, and think of that conversation to like you as a young man if you're like, hey, heard about weed, and I was like, yeah, you could go to a party and smoke some pot and you'd feel cool, and as long as you didn't get behind a wheel, you'll wake up tomorrow, won't be high, won't be hungover, continue your day, go to school on Monday, and you'll just have had a good weekend, right? I go, but then you get into like, if you do cocaine or if you do, some of these other brain altering drugs, like, yeah, that you could overdose on these or like you could change your brain chemistry and like you could have, if you do, um, you know, heavy hallucinogenics and stuff like that, like DMT, which is fucking way up there in like the hallucinogenic range.
Spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like you could have a bad trip and really fuck yourself up. Like you could really develop some issues from doing that, and having this conversation like, yeah, dude, you have a puff of a joint, John. Don't get behind a wheel. Don't get behind of anybody drunk or high. I'll come pick you up. You won't be in trouble, but like, it is a drug. It is illegal. You could get arrested for it. Like, understand the consequences of that. And like having that dialogue, I'm like, oh, it's not this scary thing, but it is just kind of like, it's not a big deal. There's no glamorization of it, right? Same with cigarettes. Yeah, cigarettes are fucking gross. Like the first time you smoke pot, you're gonna fucking cough your lungs out, right? Like it's gonna suck, and you're gonna be super duper high, and you're gonna forget it, right? Yeah, you smoke a cigarette for the first time, it fucking sucks. You cough your lungs out.
Wait, you're telling me you didn't get a buzz off your first cigarette?
I did after coughing my fucking lungs out.
Okay, dude.
Yeah,
This is something I think there's so many. This is what I can relate to with what you're saying.
sure.
Growing up, it was like smoking's bad, smoking's bad, smoking's bad. And granted, lots of my extended family had serious problems with cigarettes. I totally understand why my parents were saying it's bad. They were watching their family
Mm-hmm.
blow their money and ruin their lives with cigarettes. I totally understand it.
Sure.
But people would complain about like, hey, why do kids start smoking? I'm like, have you ever been an awkward 17-year-old
Yeah, dude,
walked outside and seen some people hanging out smoking and thought, I bet I could have 2 or 3 friends like that
you can do that.
if I went go
No,
ahead.
you hit on a perfect point. No, you've hit on a perfect point of drugs give you a friend group. You start smoking pot, stoners, baby. It doesn't matter your fucking color or creed or anything. You smoke pot, you're in a group. You're in the smoke circle. You're in this. And like me as like an awkward preteen and teenager, fucking absolutely, me and all my friends started smoking pot. Guess what? The fucking world was our oyster then. You were the guy with weed. You finally had people to talk to. Like, you were the dude who could get liquor from the fucking shady dude at the liquor store. Brother, you want to talk about talking to chicks? No,
but there's a comedian who has this whole bit. He's like, you know what? Why I support the legalization of marijuana? He's like, because I'm sick of dealers coming to my parties. Can you imagine if like the pizza delivery guy could come to your party, deliver the pizza, and then hang out with you at your party?
yeah.
And then try some of the pizza with you? And then go hang out with all your girls? and try pizza with them? He's like, yeah, legalize marijuana. I'm sick of dealing with dealers.
Yeah, dude, but that's the thing is like drugs give you a friend group, and that's fucking. I mean, that's the fucking recruiting tool that the neo-Nazi movement uses. You take young, vulnerable men who are these fucking nerdy little outcasts, and you go, "Hey, man, would you like people to talk to you? Hey, would you like a social connection with human beings that like we crave from birth?"
Yeah.
Right? Like drugs offer the same thing. That's it. Like that's the long and short of it. And especially when you go drugs are bad and you go, I started smoking pot and I get super fucking high and it feels awesome and I get the munchies and food tastes better and I have a friend group and chicks dig me because I got the eighth. Like, brother, you're fucking 16. You're like, life's looking up for the first time ever. And it's because of this little green bush, bro. Like, yeah, dog, it's kind of hard to compete with that if you haven't had an actual like conversation about drug use and marijuana with a teenager.
Just say no. Have you tried? Yes.
Yeah, exactly, dude. I started saying yes and shit started going right. You know, like, yeah. And I think that's the drug thing is like, yeah, it is a big issue, but I also think we've approached it poorly. But who fucking knows? I don't have kids. I don't have teenagers, you know. I'm probably gonna go fuck them up just like, you know, my parents fucked me up to a degree.
We all deal with trauma, but I think a lot of parenting, I don't I think an argument could be made that a lot of the fear that was sort of encapsulated in the Cold War, like out there is Russia and Russia might kill us all.
Sure.
But you didn't have to worry about your kids quite as much because there was sort of this object of fear out there. I wonder if in the 80s and 90s, as the Cold War faded and then ended in 89, I wonder if there was we had to put this ball of fear somewhere and it got transferred to the Satanic Panic and to the war on drugs and to the Just Say No movement, just part of the war on drugs. And then like concerns over stranger danger and stuff like that.
Sure.
So like these parenting focused neuroses because we had all of a sudden we had nowhere to put this anxiety.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I think that'd be a fucking great case study.
Well, we'll have to check with Father James, the resident historian, make sure I'm just not talking out of my ass. So, but dude, such a pleasure to have you here.
Yeah, dude,
thanks so much for finally coming on. We're gonna have to have you back. We didn't even get to half the things on our list. But it was a real pleasure to be able to pick your brain and hear your perspective and hopefully no one out there thinks I'm a heretic now. But yeah, we just can't wait to have you back.
Yeah, dude, this is great. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for coming on, buddy.